Chapter 2771. Xan Wu said, "Looks like she's been poisoned." Lu Xinglan glanced at Xan Wu, "Poisoned?" Xan Wu said, "It's a private matter, it's not presentable. She probably ate the dirty stuff that the servant girl brought." Lu Xinglan's gaze returned to the book, and he sneered. He did not say anything. Xan Wu also stood still. As a page boy, he was also a page boy with facial paralysis. Lu Xinglan stared at the book for a while, then finally threw it away and stood up. Xan Wu followed him. Wei Wei Bai had a fever, and some ugly red marks began to appear on her face. The system wanted to buy toad poison. It said that if she ate it, her face would definitely protrude like a toad. She saw the picture. "Ugh, I'll strangle whoever let me eat this." The system said, "It doesn't have any side effects. It looks scary, but it doesn't hurt the body at all." Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. "No, you should hurt my body. Don't hurt my face, thank you." The system said, "There's a kind of flower poison that looks better, but it will cause side effects. For example, the body will reject it, fever or cold, dizziness, and so on. You should eat toad poison." Wei Wei Bai said, "I'd rather drink arsenic, thank you." The system, "Motherfucker, you're still so picky when you set me up. Motherfucker, you're trying to pick the medicine for me." So after Wei Wei Bai ate these things, she began to have a fever and cold. She began to lie on the bed and wrapped herself in the quilt, dying. But it was more like she was poisoned. She fell asleep in a daze and noticed a faint figure by the bed. The bed curtain was put down, and her hand was outside the curtain. It seemed to be a doctor, bending down to check her pulse. She closed her eyes and did not move. Soon, there were some scattered instructions from outside. It seemed to be after prescribing the medicine, telling her how to boil it, and not to be exposed to the wind. Wei Wei Bai withdrew her hand, pulled the quilt and continued to close her eyes to rest. This setup was not without reason. After reading the information of the two servant girls, she felt that these two things should be kept a distance. These two maidservants often framed other girls. It was said that a maid who shared a room with them was forced to jump into a well. She even spread a rumor that she was having an affair with another maidservant, forcing her to hang herself. When they were transferred to the original owner's courtyard, there was no lack of ridicule and bullying. After she finished reading the information, of course, she was completely unmoved. Her reason for framing them was because she was bored to kill time. Her hobbies were just so plain and boring. When Lu Xinglan arrived at the courtyard, looking at this shabby, lifeless, and dilapidated courtyard, he frowned slightly. The doctor had already been called over. It was Mother Lu. Nothing in the backyard could escape Mother Lu's eyes. When he heard that Wei Wei Bai was like this, he just calmly called for a doctor to take a look. This was already considered to be condescending. Because Wei Wei Bai was his son's medicine, he was showing the greatest kindness. Lu Xinglan walked into the room. An empty and shabby room. When she walked behind the screen, she saw a basket of begonia flowers, a plate of purple jasmine flowers and impatiens flowers on the table. There was a small white stone mortar with a few flowers in it. So, she was making rouge. Lu Xinglan thought of the delicate skin on the girl's face, but she didn't see any traces of makeup. But her lips were red, unusually full and beautiful. She probably put on lipstick made of these petals. Lu Xinglan didn't say anything. She just looked down at the flowers for a while. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click on Save. Chapter 2772. Then he walked to the bedside. The doctor had already gone to boil the medicine. It would take some time for the medicine to be brought over. He was the only one in the room. She was supposed to be served by someone since she was promoted. But the scene in front of him was unexpectedly bleak. A small courtyard, a quiet room. In this small world, there was not a single place that looked gorgeous. Even a sip of hot water couldn't be drunk. Lu Xinglan reached out and pinched the curtain with his fingers. He was about to open it. But he heard the girl's soft and sweet voice on the bed. "Who is it?" Lu Xinglan didn't say anything. He just stared at the curtain darkly. It was as if he could see the slim figure inside through the aqua-green curtain. The person inside was stunned. "Young master." Lu Xinglan was a little surprised. "I didn't know you were so familiar with me." There were no footsteps, and the curtain wasn't transparent. He stood outside and didn't even open the curtain. She knew who he was. Lu Xinglan's eyes darkened dangerously. After a moment of silence, a soft voice sounded in an embarrassed manner. "Because of the smell on young master." Lu Xinglan stood outside. "Smell?" Wei Wei Bai's weak voice contained a hint of a smile. "It smells good, very good. Only young master has a smell." Lu Xinglan stood in front of the bed. The door was open, and his slender figure was elongated by the light. He was silent for a while before he said slowly, "I don't know what smell I have on me." But he probably knew what smell he had. He had been using sandalwood recently. This smell had probably seeped into his clothes. She actually smelled the smell on him and remembered it clearly. Lu Xinglan's calm eyes fluctuated a little. His fingertips passed through the gap in the curtain and were about to open it a little. But he heard an anxious voice from inside. "Don't open it, young master." Lu Xinglan didn't take it seriously. "Why? Can't I see the wind?" But there was no wind in the room. After a long time, her weak pleading voice came from inside. "It's ugly. I'm afraid it will scare you." Lu Xinglan was expressionless, but there was a hint of a smile in her eyes. "Oh, how ugly. Is she so ugly that her face rots and her bones are exposed? Or is she so bald that she can become a nun? Or is there worms on her skin?" Wei Wei Bai, was this a problem of ugliness? Wasn't this what a rotten corpse looked like? When he thought about how Lu Xinglan had been on the battlefield for many years, he could only forgive his poor analogy. She silently pulled the blanket up to her nose and covered most of her face. Red marks on one's face were also considered ugly. Lu Xinglan successfully reminded her of the fear of rotten face. Maybe he knew he would scare her. Lu Xinglan frowned but didn't say anything else. He only said indifferently, "I'm here to pick you up today." These words sounded a little awkward. However, Lu Xinglan was so calm that she didn't show any signs of discomfort. Seeing that she was so stupid that she was poisoned, he didn't want to argue with her. Moreover, there were only so many tricks in the harem. The reason was usually jealousy. He made her feel envious. Therefore, he personally brought her to his courtyard to express his attitude. She should be happy. Therefore, Lu Xinglan waited for the girl to thank him sweetly and happily. After waiting for a while, he found that it was terrifyingly quiet inside. Lu Xinglan sensed that something was wrong. He frowned and immediately lifted the curtain. Chapter 2773. Lu Xinglan didn't say anything. His face was even a little dark. The random touching just now made him very uncomfortable. His body also heated up. This kind of heat was so hot that he started to feel uncomfortable. He was very uncomfortable with this kind of impulsive heat. His breathing also heated up. Lu Xinglan thought that she was just confused by the fever and might calm down later. But when his attention was focused on the poison on her body, A faint and warm aura slowly approached him. Because he couldn't speak, he had to work hard to maintain the circulation of his true energy. Lu Xinglan's other senses were magnified. For example, he could see that the girl was like a harmless rabbit, but she had the most destructive power, inching closer to his face. Her cherry-like lips were soft and fragrant, slowly pressing against his throat. She had no idea what she had provoked. She even used her soft lips to rub against his Adam's apple in confusion. Lu Xinglan's Adam's apple moved, and he felt that his throat was dry. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes in confusion. She didn't know what this was and moved up uninterestedly. She struggled until the end and finally used her lips to press against the corner of his mouth in a daze. It was a simple touch. She left as soon as she touched him. The soft and sweet taste made Lu Xinglan at a loss for a moment. Then there was nothing. He almost messed up his true energy and both of them were going to be injured. If it was someone else, he would have slapped her to lie flat. But this girl was so soft, and her bones were so weak. He was afraid that if he used the wrong strength, he would beat her flat. Lu Xinglan, who had always been decisive, hesitated for a moment. With this hesitation, he could only let Wei Wei Bai act like a tyrant. She touched his tiger tail and played with it like a feather duster. Lu Xinglan slowly withdrew his true energy. He could finally speak. "If you move again, I'll throw you out." His words were full of threat, but because his tone was too gentle, it seemed neither fish nor fowl. The muddle-headed girl didn't understand at all. She kissed the corner of his lips again with effort. Only the corner of his lips. It was still a light touch and left. Lu Xinglan only felt that this kind of contact was too light, but there was also an irresistible numbness. His fingers, one by one, began to leave her back. Just as he was about to lift her away, his back tightened as the girl hugged him tightly with both hands. As if she was having a nightmare, the corners of her eyes turned red as she said in an aggrieved voice, "Young master, don't kick me, Lu Xinglan looked at her silently, a layer of watery light appearing in her eyes. The girl finally stuttered shyly, "I want to give birth to your child." Lu Xinglan, she closed her eyes and thought that she was in a dream. "I want to leave you a legacy so that you can live well," he murmured to himself. Like a butterfly falling in the breeze. She fell into the man's heart just like that. It wasn't that she wanted to give birth to a child, but that she actually dreamed of doing it for his own good. Since when were the maidservants so loyal? Lu Xinglan thought calmly, but her movements were a little hurried. She pressed her onto the bed. He lifted the blanket and covered her with it. The girl's eyes were closed, and her eyelashes were trembling. She seemed to be unable to sleep well. However, the red marks on his skin had already disappeared. Lu Xinglan lowered her head and stared at her silently for a long time. Finally, his hoarse voice sounded as if it had been touched by fire. "You like me so much that you want to have a child with me?" After saying this, he frowned and held his breath. She was confused by the fever. Why was he also fooling around? Lu Xinglan slowly exhaled a hot breath, trying to calm his mind. He heard the sound of footsteps coming from afar. It was probably a maidservant or a doctor. Lu Xinglan was about to stand up when he found that the corner of his clothes was being pulled. He turned around and saw the sleeping girl clutching the corner of his clothes tightly with her fingers. Her soft and pink fingers pinched his clothes, and the color of blue veins appeared on the back of her hand. It was all in the dream. She even wanted to catch him even if she died. Lu Xinglan was silent for a while, then sat back down. He didn't touch her, but his pair of eyes, which had always been gloomy and calm, fell on her body. There was also a trace of imperceptible warmth. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10, T, Chapter 2774. Lu Xinglan was sitting. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Master. It was a female servant. She was holding a bowl of medicine. She looked gentle and careful. It was just that her smile was a little flattering. Lu Xinglan didn't even look up. His gaze continued to fall on the small hand that was grabbing his clothes tightly. The woman's hand was indeed small. But thinking of the women at the border who fetched water or did manual labor, they were all big and round. Some of their hands were even thicker than his. He immediately twitched the corner of his mouth. Perhaps it was a certain type of woman who had small hands. Lu Xinglan's eyes were half closed. His thin and long eyelashes were more exquisite than a girl's. His pale face was also unusually handsome. The female servant who came in secretly sized him up and immediately blushed. She saw that he didn't touch Wei Wei Bai, that vixen, but was sitting. Instead, it was that vixen who was grabbing his clothes tightly. It seemed that the old madam was wrong when she said that Wei Wei Bai could touch Lu Xinglan. If he really touched her and didn't feel disgusted, how could the young master not touch her? The female servant smiled even more brightly. She went over and bowed delicately, deliberately showing her delicate waist. The medicine bowl in her hand seemed to be in slow motion as she threw it out just like that. It flew straight to the bed. Lu Xinglan's eyelashes fluttered, and his expression turned cold. His fingers casually picked up a purple jasmine flower on the table beside him and flicked it straight at the medicine bowl. The bowl immediately shattered. And the power of the flower forced all the fragments of the medicine to splash back onto the female servant. The medicine was still warm. It immediately drenched the female servant's face. The female servant immediately reached out to cover her face and cried out in pain. Lu Xinglan looked over, his eyes so cold that frost appeared. The female servant took advantage of the pain and immediately bowed down. She reached out to grab Lu Xinglan's trousers. In this backyard, who wasn't here to serve Lu Xinglan? When they came, they were all chosen by Mother Lu. Charming and charming. How were they cut out to be servants? Mother Lu had also clearly said that whoever could serve Lu Xinglan, no matter what method, they would be given a high status. These people were all here to be Lu Xinglan's women. She wasn't here to be a servant who couldn't see a man in the backyard. Therefore, even though she couldn't see Lu Xinglan in the backyard, she still couldn't see Lu Xinglan. But there was also a foul atmosphere, strife among each other, framing others everywhere. It was just to reduce the number of women. When Lu Xinglan returned in the future, he would have a chance to climb up the social ladder. When Bai Weiwei was promoted to the position of Little Master, everyone laughed at this. After all, without Lu Xinglan's acknowledgement, he was no different from them. In the end, Mother Lu went around rewarding people last night, saying that Wei Wei Bai had been touched by Lu Xinglan. The days of the Lu family's future were just around the corner. In an instant, all the female servants in the backyard were filled with resentment. She wished that Wei Wei Bai would be struck to death by lightning on the spot. Of course, she was not a fool. She was not going to cozy up to Wei Wei Bai in advance so that Wei Wei Bai could trust her. She followed Wei Wei Bai into Lu Xinglan's courtyard. In the days to come, there would be plenty of opportunities to climb into Lu Xinglan's bed. Who knew that Wei Wei Bai would be poisoned today and lie in bed waiting for death? This was what it meant to be unlucky. She deserved it. Wei Wei Bai probably would not be able to enter Lu Xinglan's courtyard. Then she would have to pick up her pace and rely on herself. If Wei Wei Bai could do it, then so could she. Although the female servant's face was in pain, her smile was exceptionally sweet. She lay on the ground and slowly reached out to touch Lu Xinglan. She kept saying softly, "Master, this servant is clumsy. Please punish me." Lu Xinglan's eyes were clear and calm as she looked down at the woman beside her feet. Chapter 2775. He frowned, and a disgusted expression appeared on his face. His voice was indifferent. "Do you know I'm sick?" When the servant heard this, she immediately nodded. "This servant knows that master is not fond of women, but that's because you haven't touched them. Men are all like this at first, but once you touch them, you won't say anything bad. Once you touch them, you won't say anything bad." His eyebrows raised slightly. The servant crawled forward a little more, and her fingers finally touched the man's pants. In the next second, the servant was kicked out. She directly rushed to the door, hit the threshold, and rolled out. Wei Wei Bai had just woken up and saw this scene. She and the system were both silent for a while. "I'd better go back to sleep," Wei Wei Bai said expressionlessly. Go back to sleep." The system also agreed. This male lead's cruelty made people speechless. After Lu Xinglan kicked the servant out, he turned around calmly. He hated women the most. When that woman approached him, he was so disgusted that he had goosebumps all over his body. She wanted to come closer. It was like seeing a disgusting insect poison, almost uncontrollable. He attacked. He continued to stare at his clothes calmly, at that delicate hand. Much more pleasing to the eye. Then he followed the hand and looked up. The girl was still asleep, but the red marks on her face and the faint greenish-gray color from the poison had disappeared. The effect of the true energy to force the poison was immediate, and she was already out of danger. He was not surprised. The doctor's prescription should be changed. It was fine not to drink the antidote. The sun gradually rose. The sun shone through the screen and into the bed. The girl's face was like a delicate flower, because it lacked the seductive charm when she opened her eyes. It had the pure beauty of a white pearl. The man stared at her face for a long time, and his dark eyes had a trace of curiosity. Just a touch, and she liked it. His thin lips slightly pursed, and a slight arc appeared. Then he slowly reached out and touched her fingers. Because she had been holding on to his clothes for too long, her fingers were a little stiff. Holding on like this, her blood was not flowing smoothly, and it should be very uncomfortable. Strange, how could he grab onto her like this in his dream? The man's fingers hooked around her fingertips. Then, he slowly removed her strength and gathered her fingers into his palm. Even though his fingers looked white, they were still white. However, he spent many years fighting and riding horses at the border. In fact, a layer of calluses had already formed on his palm. The girl's fingers were too soft, like those of a baby. As a result, he didn't dare to use too much strength when holding it, for fear that he would crush it. Just like that, they held each other for a long time. Soft, this was the only feeling he had. Other than that, he didn't feel disgusted. Lu Xinglan knew last night that she didn't feel disgusted by her. But every time he touched her, he would still be careful. He was afraid that if he didn't feel disgusted today, what if he felt disgusted tomorrow? Lu Xinglan didn't feel disgusted. She carefully pinched her soft knuckles and touched them. It was very easy to touch. The calluses on his hands rubbed against her skin until it turned red. Lu Xinglan's eyelashes suppressed the light in her eyes. Her hands felt like they could be compared to cotton. With such hands, he might not even be able to lift half a bucket of water. If they were at the border or in the snow, they would probably freeze to death within a few hours. Because his body was weak. A strong body was abnormally hard. He couldn't help but frown when he thought of something else. Could it be that he could take her to the border? He actually thought so far ahead. /full text download / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 2776. Lu Xinglan touched her hand and couldn't help but look at her face. That strange touch from last night was still fresh in his mind. He pursed his thin lips. He wasn't nervous, but he was so careful that he didn't dare to exert any strength. His hand slowly came to her face. His fingertips touched her eyelashes. They were soft too. But everyone's eyelashes were soft. Lu Xinglan thought expressionlessly. The only difference was that her eyelashes were especially long. This was also the reason why the shadows at the corners of her eyes were longer, making her more charming and seductive. Lu Xinglan's fingertips landed on the tip of her nose and tapped it. Could he press it down? He was like a child who was playing games for the first time. He was focused and even had an unconscious excitement. Just as he was about to continue, he touched her lips. A cold voice sounded from outside. "Young master, are you leaving?" It was Axian Wu's voice. Lu Xinglan's eyebrows twitched, and he quickly withdrew his fingers. Then, he said calmly and elegantly, "Yes, let's go." After saying that, he turned to leave. But he thought of something and hesitated. He turned back again and looked at the girl on the bed with deep eyes. Finally, he convinced himself. Anyway, they were going to his courtyard. He had to go early to prevent her from being poisoned again. Next time, he had to force the poison out. Lu Xinglan maintained an indifferent expression. He bent down and carefully held her waist with one hand, and the other hand was on her back. He gently carried her up just like that. Light, like a feather. Lu Xinglan's sword was probably heavier than hers. He snorted in disdain. Wei Bai, what did he dislike about her in that tone of disdain? Did he dislike that she was too pretty? Was he jealous? Just now, his fingers touched her face like a fly. Could it be that he was thinking of ways to disfigure her? After all, this target was a little crazy. Who knew if he was narcissistic? Anyway, there weren't many targets who weren't perverted. To round it off, they were all perverts. It was such a simple and crude division. Lu Xinglan carried her and wrapped her in a blanket. When he walked out, he saw the women in the courtyard. The ones in the corridor. The ones by the railings. The ones hidden outside the door. Among the flowers. And the one on the roof. Mother Lu left all the women in the backyard for him so that he could have a future. After so long, these women finally saw him. She was afraid that she would never see him again after he left. He immediately rushed over. The maid who was dragged away frightened them. They didn't dare to approach and could only stand outside the door, dressed gorgeously. It was as gorgeous as seducing peacocks. Lu Xinglan's footsteps faltered as her expression darkened. Her brows were tightly knitted together. He ordered coldly, "Little Axian, tell them to scram." With so many women around, he was afraid that he would throw up after a few steps. It was better to vomit. If he was provoked too much, he wouldn't be able to suppress his urge to draw his sword and slash people. Axian Wu also knew his problem. He glanced at the girl in Lu Xinglan's arms and raised his eyebrows in confusion. Then, Axian Wu did not say anything and immediately pulled out a horsewhip to open the way. The women immediately turned pale with fright and fled. Lu Xinglan walked out expressionlessly with Wei Bai in her arms. When he stepped out of the backyard, she heard Lu Xinglan's cold voice. "Those who offend nature and reason, find out and deal with them." Under his banner, he did not have the habit of letting people mess around in his house. As for the rest, arrange for them to go home and get married. Mother Lu had always been unreliable. Chapter 2777. This kind of thing of keeping so many women to be his widows. He should do less in the future. When a woman is lonely and crazy, she can do anything. The most vicious means often come from the harem. This kind of suffering was best known to the royal family. Lu Xinglan returned to his courtyard and suddenly found a terrible thing. There was only one bed in his room. He held the girl and was in a daze for a long time before his eyes slowly fell on a recliner. The chair was long and uncomfortable. Wei Bai woke up for a while and saw how Lu Xinglan kicked people away. It confirmed his rumored ferocity. Then she went back to sleep. After all, in her sleep, she pulled a string of consciousness and grabbed the corner of Lu Xinglan's clothes with her hand. But she practiced many times before she could do it so naturally. They were all people who made a living. It was not a big deal when they were familiar with it. They could do it automatically. Being poisoned also consumed energy. She slept until night before she got up with a yawn. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw the page boy staring at her with a poker face. Wei Bai was also speechless. Finally, the page boy said, "You're awake." Wei Bai said, "Yes." The page boy brought a plate with a bowl of porridge on it. "Eat. You can't eat too much after being poisoned. Eat tomorrow." The page boy explained as if he was reciting a book. It was dry. Wei Bai was indeed hungry. She held the bowl and chopsticks and said in a low voice, "Thank you." The page boy said indifferently, "I'll get some meat for you tomorrow." Then he turned around and left. When he went out, he whispered disdainfully. His voice is so soft. He must not have eaten enough meat and is starving. Wei Bai, she held the bowl and sat on the chair. The chair was a little high. Her feet carefully touched the balance beam under the chair. Then she lowered her head and ate small mouthfuls. Suddenly, the broken beads were blown by the wind. Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. She looked up and saw the man coming in through the beaded curtain. He had just finished bathing, and his ink-black hair was draped behind his back. His slender eyelashes were full of wet mist, which made his eyes look dark and deep. It was exceptionally pure and beautiful. He saw the girl sitting on the chair and sipping porridge staring at him blankly. Lu Xinglan's expression froze. Then, he couldn't help but stand with his hands behind his back. He said coldly, "From now on, you will live here." Wei Bai held the bowl and buried her face in it. Her ears turned red as she looked up and said in a low voice, "Yes, young master." Lu Xinglan didn't say anything, as if she was afraid that he would feel uncomfortable. Instead, she turned around and went to the desk to read. He leaped onto the sandalwood bench with a book in his hand. The chair creaked. The surroundings were silent. The two were speechless. Lu Xinglan flipped through the book and peeked at her from the corner of her eye. He found that she had finished the porridge and placed the bowl on the table silently. Then she fumbled in the cuff. Her lotus-like wrist stretched out cleanly from the cuff. He stared at her beautiful wrist and found that she only took out a handkerchief and wiped her cherry-red lips. Clean and seductive. Under the light, the beauty was even more beautiful. Lu Xinglan rocked the chair and pulled his attention back to the military book. But from time to time, his eyes would stray away from home and look at the girl sitting under the light. He was curious about her. It definitely wasn't any special emotion. It was rare to find someone who wasn't disgusting, so he was curious. Lu Xinglan thought calmly. Finally, it was about time. He put away the book and said coldly, "Why aren't you resting? You're poisoned and your body is weak. If you don't sleep, you'll drag down your body. Do you want me to buy a coffin for you?" Wei Bai was sitting obediently on the chair and didn't dare to move. She immediately shook her head and said anxiously, "No need, no need. I have my own money to buy it." I don't need young master's money. Lu Xinglan. The. Chapter 2778. Was she cursing herself? After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she also felt that something was wrong and immediately shut up. Lu Xinglan felt that her reserved manner was probably because she had been oppressed badly. So she didn't dare to move. He got up and walked in front of her. Then he bent down and picked her up. Wei Wei Bai's face was red as she looked at him shyly. Lu Xinglan put her on the bed. When he left, he felt that the softness and warmth of the girl's body were leaving, making him a little reluctant. He frowned and left without saying anything. However, he saw the girl squatting obediently, not daring to go down to sleep. Instead, she opened her charming eyes and stared at him eagerly. "Young master, aren't you going to sleep?" The girl's voice was gentle and had a hint of pleading, as if she was seducing him. Lu Xinglan slowly swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He was going to sleep on the bench. She was originally his person. Once she entered his courtyard, she wouldn't be able to marry anyone. So, it didn't matter if he touched her. Lu Xinglan expressionlessly reached out and unbuttoned his clothes. His fingertips were a little stiff. Fortunately, Wei Wei Bai couldn't see it. He peeled off his clothes, revealing a thin white shirt. The man didn't say a word and was about to go to bed. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai immediately roll up the blanket and place it in the middle. She gave a small space. She gave him more than half of the space. Wei Wei Bai revealed a gentle and sweet smile and said considerately, "I know that young master hates women, but you want to treat your illness. Let's do it step by step. I won't touch young master. This way, you'll feel better." Lu Xinglan's impatient hand froze and then retracted it as if nothing had happened. He said calmly, "Okay." Then he lay down and thought frantically. He didn't show too much desire just now, right? He didn't, right? Wei Wei Bai also smiled and lay down. Soon, the sound of her small breathing could be heard. Lu Xinglan opened his eyes and saw the blanket in the middle. He pursed his lips. He reached out and carefully pulled away. Suddenly, the girl turned over. His movements were stiff and he didn't dare to move. The next moment, she suddenly leaned over and burrowed into his embrace. Like a kitten, she rubbed against his chest. Then he continued to sleep. Lu Xinglan, after hesitating for a long time, his hand gently landed on her back. The man calmly thought that she was the one who had leaned over, not him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 15. Lu Xinglan opened her eyes and saw that the sky outside was still dark. He was carrying a person in his arms, who was as soft as a cotton ball. After a moment of hesitation, he slowly lowered his eyes and saw the side of the girl's face leaning against his chest, her long hair spread out on his arm. Her eyelashes were tightly shut, and her fair cheeks were slightly flushed. Lu Xinglan carefully extended her finger and poked at the red halo. It was neither hot nor soft. Girls, why are they so soft everywhere? Could it be that his bones were soft too? That shouldn't be the case. After all, if they were really soft, they wouldn't be able to walk anymore. However, the skeleton was like a cat, which was indeed beyond his imagination. When he was disgusted with women, he felt like he was looking at a bedbug when he saw them. He didn't pay attention to what these women looked like at all. Not to mention paying attention to whether or not they were soft, whether or not their bones were small. Lu Xinglan noticed that her eyelashes were trembling, so he immediately retracted his finger as if nothing had happened. Then he saw her bright red lips pursed, as if she was thirsty. She even licked the corner of her lips with the tip of her tongue. Lu Xinglan watched expressionlessly. His eyes were extremely dark. Wei Wei Bai didn't wake up. She moved with difficulty, then turned over and continued to sleep. Chapter 2779. Lu Xinglan saw her with his back facing her. He didn't know if he should straighten her up and carry her again, or just let her lie like this. And it was almost dawn. Lu Xinglan glanced at the messy bed. Then he looked at the blanket that was rolled up like salted vegetables kicked to the side. He reached out and pulled the blanket over. Then, he rolled the blanket up with a calm expression. He tried to put the long blanket in the middle. But she was lying too close. With this, there was almost no space left. Lu Xinglan held the blanket and pursed his thin lips. Then, he tried to gently place his fingers on the girl's thin back. He wanted her to sleep a little more inside. But just as his palm touched the thin back, he felt the heat spread to his palm. He stiffened for a while before retracting his fingers. Forget it. If he pushed her like this, she would definitely wake up. Lu Xinglan could only try to put the blanket in the middle. Then, half of his body was almost hanging outside. Just sleep like this. Lu Xinglan thought with a calm expression. Then, he looked sideways and stared at Wei Wei Bai's back. That thin shoulder line and the exquisite outline of her collarbone seemed to be faintly discernible. The lines of her clothes extended down her beautiful back. Until her waist. Lu Xinglan's fingers moved and he resisted the urge to measure her waist. It was very thin. He looked at it for a long time. The sky was slightly bright. Then, he heard Wei Wei Bai move, as if she was about to wake up. He immediately closed his eyes and maintained a posture that looked difficult but was actually very easy for him. He lay on his side and leaned against the edge of the bed. He closed his eyes and his breathing stabilized. Then, he heard the girl behind him seem to be a little puzzled. Then, she was silent for a while. Lu Xinglan didn't close his eyes calmly. Then, he felt a pair of hands gently touching his back. He forced himself not to stiffen instinctively. Did she want to touch him? In the end, the fingers only brushed past him lightly. Then, he felt the blanket behind him being pulled back bit by bit. He was pushed very far outside. When the blanket was pulled away by her, it was pulled away. The sound of the blanket shaking could be heard. The blanket gently covered his body. Summer was hot. Even if there was no ice at night, one would still feel hot. So it didn't matter if he didn't cover himself with a blanket at night. However, in the early morning, the dew condensed and fell. Instead, it became colder. Lu Xinglan's eyelashes didn't move, and her expression was still as calm as if she was really asleep. He felt the girl's fingertips lightly sweep across his body before withdrawing. She seemed to have no idea that her kind of contact was to him. Like feathers, they tickled everywhere. After covering him with the blanket, he seemed to want to get off the bed. She hesitated for a moment, then carefully stretched out her leg and crossed over his waist. His breathing became a little erratic. Because her feet didn't seem to be able to find a foothold, he silently moved his waist. Her small feet just happened to have a place to step on. She did not seem to notice his subtle movements. Gently, she continued to slowly cross his body and was just about to cross his other leg. Lu Xinglan held her breath, not daring to move. The clothes on her body swept past his body. There was no weight to it, but it was a little hard for him to bear. The girl on top of him was finally about to cross his other leg and get off the bed. However, she neglected a serious matter. He slept too outside, and half of his body was suspended in the air. Her other foot could step on the edge of the bed, and it was because he struggled to move the little space on his waist for her. To read the full article at https://www.sashu Calm fast to TXT download at https://www.sashu. Calm fast to read on your phone. https://m/sashu. Calm to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the fast, comma. Chapter 2780. She wanted to get off the bed and rely on her own strength to not touch him. Unless she jumped off the bed directly. There was no edge for her to use. So all of a sudden, her legs missed a step. She was about to fall to the ground head first. A hand suddenly appeared and grabbed her by the collar, dragging her back. Wei Wei Bai suddenly crashed into a warm embrace. She was stunned. The man was also hit and his chest felt a little stuffy. She was stunned for a moment. Almost without giving the other party a chance to touch her, she reached out to push him away and rushed off the bed. She didn't even take off her shoes. With a head of messy hair, she looked back blankly. However, she saw that the man was still sitting. His thin clothes were open, revealing a large area of white skin on his chest. He looked at her calmly. But there was an indescribable emotion in his eyes. It seemed like he was being despised. He was surprised. Wei Wei Bai immediately went barefoot to bring a spittoon over. "Young master, do you want to vomit?" Lu Xinglan's face. Wei Wei Bai put the spittoon on the bed with a worried expression. "When I touched you just now, did you feel disgusted? If you feel disgusted, don't hold it in. Let's do it slowly. You won't be able to stand it if we get too intimate." His illness of being disgusted with women. It was too famous. When someone mentioned Lu Xinglan, it wasn't his literary talent or martial arts talent. It was his strange illness of being disgusted with women. Lu Xinglan looked at her silently for a while. He couldn't help but smile. "No, I feel like my illness is getting better." Wei Wei Bai lowered her head helplessly and reached out to tug at her messy clothes. But when she heard that his illness was getting better, her beautiful eyes lit up and she immediately looked up. She said softly, "Young master, is that true?" Lu Xinglan's gaze fell on her charming and seductive eyes and he was stunned for a moment. Then he said calmly, "Yes, come closer to me. I'll see if it's an illusion." Bai Wei Wei immediately ran to the bed in bare feet, as cheerful as a rabbit. She tried to reach out her hand, but hesitated. The man sitting on the bed had an unusually deep and cold gaze. The shape of his eyes was exceptionally beautiful. The slightly long and narrow ends of his eyes had an exceptionally delicate curve. He tilted his perfect jawline and pursed his soft thin lips. His ink-black hair was casually draped over his shoulders. It was more casual than usual, and there was also a trace of evil that made people tremble. He saw her hesitate. Her pale red lips parted slightly. "What's wrong?" Wei Wei Bai blushed and quickly stuttered, "It's okay. Don't you feel uncomfortable if I touch you there?" Lu Xinglan lowered her eyes as if she was thinking about something. Then, he said in a low and gentle voice, "I'm not sure. You can touch them all." These words sounded like a hooligan. Unfortunately, the little white rabbit in front of him did not understand. Instead, she had a confused look on her face as she stretched out her soft and fair fingers and placed them on his shoulder as if she was testing him. "Do you feel uncomfortable?" Lu Xinglan glanced to the side and saw her beautiful wrist on his shoulder. Slender, but with a sense of roundness. She was exceptionally cute. He looked at her for a while before slowly shifting his gaze away. "It's not that uncomfortable. Try touching something else." Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. Her fingertips trembled slightly as she gently touched his neck. His pulse seemed to be a little fast. Her fingers couldn't help but tremble. When the girl's fingers touched his neck, Lu Xinglan overreacted. People who came from the battlefield. They valued their own fatal parts very much. Chapter 2781. If someone were to touch a vital part of the body would instinctively resist. But this thought of resisting disappeared very quickly. More importantly, the temperature of her fingertips was very comfortable. Lu Xinglan did not move, but said in a low voice, "You can continue." The girl's fingers stiffened for a moment, but she still obeyed his order and continued to move up. Her fingertips gently landed on his chin. Her touch was so soft. It was as if she was afraid of hurting him. Her fingertips followed his chin and moved up to his soft thin lips. His lips were very tight, as if he was enduring something. The girl's fingers paused. Her beautiful eyes carried a trace of pure love that could not be suppressed. It was not a love that was so earth-shattering that she would risk her life for him. It was shallow and faint. But it was an exceptionally pure love. Lu Xinglan's eyelashes trembled, and his face was slightly red. Her gentle gaze was like a kiss that fell on the tip of his heart. It was destroying his woman's defenses bit by bit. If he had been a little apprehensive about touching her before. But now she knew that he really did not dislike her. Lu Xinglan stared at the girl's face that was close to his. She was serious and shy. She was unusually concerned about his condition. She asked nervously in a low voice, "Do you feel uncomfortable?" Lu Xinglan pursed his lips and said with a frown, "I seem to be able to accept more of this level of touch." Wei Bai was confused. Accept more. Lu Xinglan thought for a moment, and was unusually calm and natural. He reached out his fingertips and lifted her face. Then he lowered his head. His thin red lips touched hers. He knew it was soft. She was soft everywhere. The girl's breath was unusually clean. There was a hint of floral fragrance. Her breathing suddenly became chaotic, and her body trembled uncontrollably. Her face was so red that it was about to explode. Lu Xinglan's eyelashes trembled, and he gently let go of her. Then the man calmly looked into her eyes, as if he had done something very normal. "Well, I don't feel uncomfortable. Maybe my condition has improved a little." Wei Bai stammered nervously. Is that so?" Lu Xinglan said seriously, "Really?" Wei Bai said helplessly, "Very good. As long as young master is good, I'm good." After saying that, she nervously reached out to tuck her hair behind her ear. But he was too flustered, and his fingers trembled non-stop. Her hair was getting messier and messier. Lu Xinglan reached out her hand, her slender fingers slowly caressing the messy hair on her face. Then, she brushed past her flushed face strand by strand, trailed behind those exquisite and adorable ears. Wei Bai did not dare to move. She could only lower her head and let him tidy up. Lu Xinglan also knew that she had scared her. Although she looked charming. However, it didn't mean that her temperament was as mature. She should still be young. Lu Xinglan smiled. "Go and wash up. There's a room for you in the courtyard. Last night was a special occasion. After all, other than Xan Wu, no one else was allowed to enter his courtyard. That was why so many rooms were covered in dust. Xan Wu had probably tidied up a house today." Wei Bai immediately nodded and wanted to walk out. In the end, two fingers calmly pinched the clothes at the back of her waist. "You, put on your shoes and coat before you go out." Xan Wu was outside. She was a girl. How could she be so disheveled? Wei Bai was stunned. She immediately turned around and put on her shoes. Her small feet slipped into the embroidered shoes. Lu Xinglan leaned against the bed, his beautiful eyes slightly narrowed. It seemed casual, but also seemed deliberate. His gaze never left her. Wei Wei Bai put on her shoes and put on her outer robe. Her waist was slender and pleasing to the eye. "Young master, I'll leave first." Her back was facing him. She stood in the faint light of the morning sun. Her black hair was like satin, and her figure was exquisite and petite. She was like the reeds in the water, and as fragrant as the purple jasmine flowers she used to make rouge. Lu Xinglan lowered his eyes, hiding the surprise and the desire to plunder in his eyes. He lowered his voice. "Go." Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and walked out in small steps. Her skirt swayed as she walked out. When she reached the door, she put her hand on the edge of the porch and casually turned around. The girl's delicate face was exceptionally beautiful in the light. She glanced at him and couldn't help but smile happily. Then she stepped out. That smile was full of charm, but also pure and natural. Lu Xinglan was stunned for a moment. His heartbeat was somewhat uncontrollable and accelerated. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 20. Chapter 2782. The house was on the west side of the courtyard, only a short corridor away from Lu Xinglan's house. There was a carp pond in the middle. There were withered flowers everywhere. Yes, the most powerful person in the Lu family, the only successor, lived in such a messy place. Because Lu Xinglan didn't allow others to enter his courtyard. Not a single female servant was allowed to enter. Mother Lu didn't allow men either. Because he didn't like women in the first place. If he brought more men to serve him, wouldn't he forget the good things about women? So it made his life a little more difficult. He could think of female servants. In the end, Lu Xinglan only let Wu take care of his own house. The rest of the place was left in ruins, and no one was allowed to enter to serve him. Whoever came in, he would just kick them out with a single kick. Lu Xinglan only cared about that small place of his. The rest of the place had nothing to do with him. So when Wei Wei Bai opened the window, she saw withered leaves fluttering outside. In the middle of the day, there were weeds and wildflowers outside. Those who didn't know would think that they lived on the top of a mountain. She held a round fan and fanned a bee away. There were many miscellaneous flowers, and there were also many butterflies and bees. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was so annoying. Butterflies and bees were fine, but there would definitely be many mosquitoes at night. No wonder there was incense everywhere in Lu Xinglan's house. This was to smoke mosquitoes. Wei Wei Bai rested her head by the window, looking bored. Lu Xinglan, who was wearing a black robe, walked out of the house with handsome features. When he passed by the corridor, he saw one of the girl's arms resting gently by the window. Her wrist was so white that it was shining. Her face was slightly tilted, and her face was flushed because of the heat. Her black hair was like dark satin, falling on her shoulders. He stopped in his tracks. Hiding by the corridor, she didn't see him. A butterfly flew over and landed on the flower hairpin in her hair. The flowers on her head were all fresh. They were casually picked from the courtyard. The butterfly treated the flowers on her head as its resting place. She didn't move, as if she was dying. In this weather, the house was indeed a little hot. There wasn't much wind today. Lu Xinglan frowned slightly. His gaze swept across her slightly hot cheeks, and the wrist hanging by the window. It was exquisite like a piece of warm jade. Lu Xinglan's gaze lingered on him for a while before she looked away and silently walked in another direction. Wei Wei Bai looked up and looked in the direction Lu Xinglan left. She didn't have any intention of moving. Instead, he slowly fanned himself with a circular fan. It was too hot. She was too lazy to move. She would wait until it was cooler at night to capture this heartless dog. There were a few big cold basins of Lu Xian's. There were also those with incense, mosquito nets, and gauze nets. He enjoyed it. Then, she was given an empty room. Only was Lu Xian. The rest of the furniture looked as if it had been moved in from other rooms. She didn't have any girly things at all. She sighed. This kind of man needed to be trained. When Lu Xinglan entered the palace, she rode a horse and galloped through the palace gates. The palace guards at the gate respectfully stepped aside. Lu Xinglan's outstanding achievements were not enough to describe Lu Xinglan's contributions. The Southern Empire had always been suppressed by the North. Every year, they would send a large amount of tribute to the North. The Lu family was the only pillar of support for the Southern Empire. It was also the only barrier preventing the Northern Empire from taking over the Southern Empire. But in the face of the increasingly powerful Northern Empire, the Southern Empire's predicament was still precarious. When Lu Xinglan was young, all the men in the Lu family died in battle. You can see it next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2783. Relying on the Lu family's prestige. That gave Lu Xinglan the time to grow up. The Lu family's reputation among the people was much better than the royal families. Everyone felt at ease when they mentioned the Lu family. As long as the Lu family existed and the only man in the Lu family didn't die, the morale of the people in the south was still strong. That way, the southern nation would have morale, and the southern nation's weak army would dare to fight against the northern nation's cavalry. After Lu Xinglan grew up, he completely reversed the disadvantage of the Southern Empire. He was the first to beat the Northern Empire to a pulp. He was even the general who seized and harvested the territory of the Northern Empire. Last year, they had won 3 consecutive battles, and had almost destroyed the northern country. If the Northern Empire hadn't immediately surrendered and returned all the silver given by the Southern Empire. There were also all kinds of bribes to the imperial court and the royal family. The Northern Empire would probably have been destroyed by Lu Xinglan. For the Southern Empire, its current status as a hero came from Lu Xinglan's achievements. This was also the reason why the royal family hated him more and more. Lu Xinglan entered the palace and got off his horse. He entered the emperor's bedroom. The head eunuch immediately came over to take the horsewhip and said with a flattering smile, "General Lu, His Majesty is waiting for you." Lu Xinglan glanced at him indifferently. There was no trace of emotion on his indifferent and fair face. "Where's His Majesty?" As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Xinglan heard hurried footsteps. The current young emperor, Yuan Xian, ran over. He happily held a painting that was too horrible to look at and said cheerfully, "Xinglan, you're here. Look at my painting. Is it comparable to yours?" Lu Xinglan was good at zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was a genius. He glanced at the painting indifferently and bowed with a calm attitude before saying, "This subject's little tricks are not as good as His Majesty's at all." Yuan Xian immediately said, "Come on, don't be modest. Who doesn't know that your painting has been sold for a sky-high price?" These words were a little sarcastic. Yuan Xian immediately realized that his tone was wrong. He immediately changed his tone and said intimately, "I heard that you recently took in a concubine. How did you recover from your strange illness?" Lu Xinglan lowered his eyelashes. His eyes were extremely cold, but his tone was still indifferent. "It looks disgusting, but my mother couldn't stand it and forced it on me." Yuan Xian was relieved when he heard this. "That's right. You probably haven't met the right person with this illness. Our younger sister, Yuan De, is still waiting for you. When you're done with your treatment, let me know and I'll grant you a marriage." Lu Xinglan coldly raised her eyelashes. Her deep and cold eyes were like black stones at the bottom of the water, so beautiful that it was devoid of any human aura. He pursed his thin lips and smiled perfunctorily. If I'm lucky enough to get better, I'll tell you, Your Majesty. Yuan Xian did not care about this. He pulled Lu Xinglan and walked inside. Stay for a meal today. We haven't seen you in a long time. Lu Xinglan's expression was indifferent as she said flatly, No, my mother is still waiting for me to return. Yuan Xian didn't force him. I'm only here today to reward you with something. Take it and leave. After he finished speaking, a row of eunuchs stepped forward. There were all kinds of gold, silver, jewels, and supplements. Lu Xinglan glanced at him with disinterest, then bowed. Your subject thanks Your Majesty. After saying that, he glanced at the sky. If he hurried back, he could still go back for lunch. He didn't know why, but the image of Wei Wei Bai leaning against the window with her thick eyelashes half closed flashed in his mind. Humans were more delicate than flowers. When a butterfly landed on her head, she didn't know how to brush it away. // Chapter 2784. After the salute, he bid farewell and left. Lu Xinglan went straight up after leaving the emperor's bedroom. The eunuch happily came up and handed him a horsewhip. Lu Xinglan didn't even look at the eunuch. He pulled the reins and was about to leave. A young girl in a gorgeous dress hurried over. Lu Xinglan, stop right there. Sitting on the horse, Lu Xinglan's cold eyes casually glanced down. It was Princess Yuan De. It was that woman with a vicious heart who looked like a piece of rotten meat to him. If he was to other women, he would be 10 times more disgusted. Then to Yuan De, he would be 100 times more disgusted. Yuan De ran over and immediately opened her hands to stop his horse. Lu Xinglan, when are you going to marry me? I'm already 22, an old lady. Lu Xinglan looked down and looked at her indifferently. He didn't even frown. For this kind of woman, any emotion was a waste of energy. He didn't make any expression. Yuan De's face was full of anger. She adjusted her heavy golden hairpin. I've been waiting for you for so many years. Where's your conscience? Today, you have to go with me to Imperial Mother to ask for a decree and get married. Lu Xinglan's expression was incomparably cold. He slightly raised his chin and looked at her coldly. Your Highness, this subject has to leave the palace. Please step aside. Yuan De immediately put her hands on her hips. Where are you going? Looking for your concubine. Lu Xinglan lowered his head. The summer light reflected in his ink-black eyes. Faint fluctuations of emotions appeared in those ink-black eyes. His voice was low and calm, but it was as bone-piercing as ice. You shouldn't have the qualifications to care who I'm looking for. Princess is also old. Saying that you're waiting for me is just a cover for not being able to get married. After all, you know that I can't get close to women. Who would really like a man who hated women? Yuan De was immediately enraged. His heavily rouged eyes glared at her. Lu Xinglan, what do you mean? You hate women, but you treat me differently. Lu Xinglan looked at her indifferently. A trace of disgust appeared in his beautiful eyes. I don't know how I treat the princess differently. Yuan De immediately said proudly, you kick other women away, but you only hate me verbally. You never kick me. You treat me special. Besides, you hate women. It's just an illness. I can definitely cure you. After saying that, Yuan De thought of something and frowned. Also, you hate women, so why do you still have a concubine by your side? If it was your mother, you can just kill her and throw her into the well and say that she accidentally fell into the water. Lu Xinglan's eyes were cold as he looked at her quietly. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up. He wasn't happy, but he was full of mockery. Sorry, it's my fault. Lu Xinglan's tone softened, and her voice was pleasant and seductive. I'm willing to correct my mistakes. All Yuanda got were words of disgust from him. When had he ever seen him so amiable? She immediately ran over. Lu Xinglan, are you going to marry me? Lu Xinglan's icy gaze landed on her, and the horsewhip in her hand suddenly lashed out with all her might. Yuanda felt a sharp pain in her body and let out a scream. Lu Xinglan squeezed the horse's belly, and the horse ran forward. When it ran past Yuanda, he lowered his eyes slightly, and there was even a trace of viciousness and murderous intent in his eyes. Then, Lu Xinglan raised his foot and kicked her out. Slash. Chapter 2785. This action came too fast and no one could stop him. When everyone came back to their senses, only Princess Yuanda was lying on the ground and screaming at the door. Lu Xinglan, who was riding on a horse, disappeared at the entrance of the palace. Someone immediately called for the imperial doctor. Someone also ran to the palace to find the emperor. Yuan Xian was tearing up his painting with a smile. After hearing this, his face turned cold. Yuanda should be taught a lesson. Lu Xinglan is not someone she can provoke. She should take a look at herself. She is a slut that no one wants. Who didn't know that Yuanda had dozens of gigolos in the princess's residence? She had a part in the bad reputation of the imperial family. After saying this, Yuan Xian curled his lips coldly. Did you find that concubine's information? Is she really a servant? The head eunuch said respectfully, yes, it was Mother Lu who forced it on you. Yuan Xian snorted. Lu Xinglan can forget about having children in this life. As long as the Lu family is alive, the imperial family will be suppressed. The head eunuch looked at the gloomy young emperor in front of him and didn't say anything. Instead, Yuan Xian said with a smile, my painting is not good. Kill the artist who taught me to paint. The head eunuch said, yes, your majesty. Yuan Xian smiled innocently. Oh right, if Lu Xinglan really touches that concubine, send someone to kill her. Although he poisoned Lu Xinglan back then, he couldn't get close to the woman and cut off the Lu family's escape route. But who knew if the drug would suddenly lose its effect? The Lu family couldn't go on like this. Otherwise, he would have to live in Lu Xinglan's shadow for the rest of his life. Yuan Xian looked at the broken paintings gloomily. Then, he slowly parted his lips, revealing a childlike, cute, yet sinister smile. This country was his. Lu Xinglan couldn't take it away. Bai Weiwei sat and watched with an indifferent expression. Xan Wu was cooking. He quickly used a big kitchen knife to cut and classify all the vegetables. Weiwei Bai was washing the cabbage. There were only 2 of them in this courtyard. Lu Xinglan, that weirdo, didn't let people serve her. He didn't even want to eat in the big kitchen. Xan Wu had to do it himself. Weiwei Bai also wants to eat free food. Washing vegetables will wrinkle her hands, which is not good for her skin. But because of her character, she couldn't be lazy. She could only curse Lu Xinglan, that weirdo, while looking at Xan Wu's gorgeous way of cutting vegetables with admiration. The meal was ready. Xan Wu carried the food tray and headed straight for Lu Xinglan's room. Weiwei Bai also held a bowl and chopsticks and followed them eagerly. She was hungry. If she didn't eat now, she would eat someone. In the end, when they returned to Lu Xinglan's room and put down the bowl and chopsticks, they heard the sound of the door being kicked open in the courtyard. Xan Wu didn't even lift his eyelids. He set the table and disappeared. That speed was extremely fast. Weiwei Bai sat there with her chopsticks in a daze. She saw Lu Xinglan walking in quickly from the door. His face was cold and gloomy, and his beautiful eyes were filled with a cold light. He saw Wei Wei Bai sitting at the table, her tender fingers holding a pair of chopsticks. The food on the table was steaming hot. He calmed down and his tone finally softened. "Did you specially cook for me?" "Wei Wei Bai, this is a misunderstanding. If she cooked, the color of the food would definitely not be so normal." But there was no time for explanations. Lu Xinglan had already walked in front of him. His breathing was a little messy, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. He just stared at her blankly for a while. Suddenly, he reached out his slender fingers and gently touched the flower by her hair. His fingertips touched the flower, and it was excessively smooth. His exquisite eyelashes fluttered, and his tone was low and gentle. "You like flowers so much." Did she like flowers? Wasn't it because she didn't have money to spend? Otherwise, Jean Zon's hair would only match her beautiful face if she had a head full of tea leaves. This shabby wild flower would attract bees and butterflies. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were like water. She lowered her head shyly and said softly, "I didn't like to wear flowers on my head in the past." Lu Xinglan's fingertips ran through her thick hair, and the nausea in his chest was finally relieved. The disgust and the desire to vomit when he saw Yuan De just now was stirring up his internal organs and starting to hurt. But when he saw her and smelled her scent, he felt like he had obtained the antidote. His voice was soft and gentle. "Why do you like it again?" Wei Wei Bai looked up at him hesitantly, and then quickly looked away. She smiled, and her voice was soft. "Because I want to see young master, my hair is too plain. It's not good." Lu Xinglan was stunned, and after a long time, he smiled. He suddenly lowered his head, his nose close to her hair, and his thin lips touching her forehead. She was stunned. But she heard the man's voice with a hint of fatigue and warmth. "The fragrance of flowers, it smells good." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. Is at https://www.sashu.com// comma. Chapter 2786. The rice was delicious. After Wei Wei Bai finished eating, she finally understood why Lu Xinglan didn't want the dishes from the main kitchen. Xan Wu's cooking skills could let her eat 3 more bowls of rice. Of course, for the sake of her image, she ate 2.5 bowls. After eating, Lu Xinglan reached out and touched the flower on her hair. "Stay here tonight." He said this a little gloomily. Wei Wei Bai blinked, a trace of nervousness in her round almond eyes, and her face was pink. Seeing her like this, Lu Xinglan's fingers trembled, and the flower was actually pulled down by his strength. The petals turned into pieces and fell to the ground. Lu Xinglan lowered his head and stared deeply at the flower on the ground. This flower was too easy to pull. Wei Wei Bai immediately reached out and gently smoothed the somewhat messy hair on her temples. The young girl smiled sweetly, her almond eyes were moist, and her face without makeup was delicate and white. Her voice was gentle and sweet with a smile. "It's okay, young master. Flowers are all like this, they fall after a day." It was just that when night came, the flowers began to lose their moisture and began to fall. Lu Xinglan stared at her smile, and after a long time, he lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "Flowers are indeed not very sturdy." The young girl's jewelry was a little lacking. It was only then that he realized that her clothes and jewelry were unusually simple. It was just that he didn't like women, so he never paid attention to what women needed. He thought that she really liked flowers. Maybe it was just that she didn't have anything else to decorate. Thinking back, she lowered her head and softly said that it wasn't good to see him without hair. Lu Xinglan's dark eyes were a little sluggish, and then he turned around as if nothing had happened and said, "Go take a bath first. I asked Xan Wu to boil the water. My mother will often send this servant to check on you. If she finds out that you're not sleeping in the same room as me, she will punish her." This sentence was too caring. He hesitated for a moment, then changed his tone and said, "She will force me to interact with more women." When Wei Wei Bai heard this, her slender eyelashes trembled, and her face paled. However, she quickly forced a smile. "Yes, the young master's illness is not completely healed yet. Too many women are not good for you." After saying that, she immediately said, "Then I'll go take a bath." After saying this, her face turned red. She felt that it was too ambiguous. Lu Xinglan glanced sideways at her, only to see her quicken her pace. Like a gust of wind, she ran past him. He was also silent for a moment. His thin lips couldn't help but curl up, revealing a light smile. Then, he walked away and came to the table to look at the map carefully. After watching for a while, he was distracted. After trying for a long time, Lu Xinglan finally looked up and remained silent. He pursed his thin lips tightly and his eyes were extremely deep. Finally, as if he had confirmed something, he turned slightly to the side and said, "Little Xan, don't girls need something different from men?" "Xan Wu, what do you mean?" Lu Xinglan looked calm, but she was actually in a daze. Specifically, what did he mean? He had never noticed this before. He had been fighting at the border all year round, and all he saw were rough men. There were not many women. There were also middle-aged women who were thicker than men and looked more manly than men. When he returned to the capital, the women he occasionally saw were indeed different from those at the border. They made him feel even more disgusted than those middle-aged women at the border. He felt nauseous when he saw them, so he didn't want to pay attention to what they needed. But when he thought about it, the dresses seemed to be colorful. Chapter 2787. Also, there didn't seem to be any flowers on her hair. Were they all jewelry? Oh right, did she put makeup on her face? After thinking about it for a long time, Lu Xinglan's head started to hurt. He reached out and calmly rubbed his temples. "What do you think?" He threw the question to Xan Wu. Xan Wu was silent for a moment. Women have their period, so cotton cloth needs to be prepared. Lu Xinglan was speechless. Then he finally reacted and his face started to redden. "Something else. Prepare cotton cloth for her." Xan Wu was silent for a moment. Some women with small feet need foot wrappings. It's a relatively long cotton cloth. Lu Xinglan felt his head hurt even more. He sighed. Other than cotton cloth, Wei Wei Bai's feet were indeed small. But those were healthy feet, not wrappings. Only some pedantic officials would bind their women's feet. Even the royal family didn't bind their feet. This was a trend brought by the previous generation of the Lu family because women who entered the Lu family couldn't bind their feet. For a military family like the Lu family, binding one's feet meant that one had no fighting power. Even women couldn't stand it. The Lu family was strong and took the lead in resisting women with small feet. Many women who were harmed by small feet also agreed. Therefore, the trend of binding feet slowly died down. Binding feet was a handicap. Lu Xinglan recalled Wei Wei Bai's petite feet. Her pink toes were round and beautiful like pearls. Fortunately, she didn't have this habit. Otherwise, he would have to treat her feet. Xan Wu was silent for a while and finally said, "You need rouge and face powder. I saw a girl making it. Also, you need some money on your head." Lu Xinglan, money. Xan Wu, Don't those women wear a pile of gold, silver, jade, and so on their heads? These things were money. They could be exchanged. Xian Wu added, but it's not good to give them gold directly. You need to mold the gold into flowers or something before wearing it. This woman was really pretentious. To be eye-catching, it would look best to stuff a lump of gold directly on her head. Xian Wu thought expressionlessly. Lu Xinglan was also a young master of an aristocratic family. It was because all the men in the Lu family died when he was young, and he was the only one. When he was young, he was invited to the palace by the Empress Dowager for a period of time. His loyal subordinates and elders in the army were afraid that his only son would be harmed. He immediately found a reason to take him away from the capital. Therefore, he grew up in the army. The first thing he saw when he opened the door was the cold snow and sandstorms of the border. She had never had the chance to learn about women's common sense. When she grew up and returned to the capital, the people she interacted with were all men. Because he kicked a woman out of the temple with one kick, he became famous. That was why no woman dared to approach him. Except for that disgusting Princess Yuande. Lu Xinglan picked up the brush again and thought deeply for a while before saying, later, go to my mother's place and open the inner treasury. Pick out some pretty things that belong to women and bring them over. Xian Wu nodded expressionlessly. Yes. Then he disappeared. Lu Xinglan narrowed her eyes. There was a benefit to taking it from his mother. It was just that he was interested in Wei Wei Bai. Her request was for him to leave behind descendants. It would be best to treat the illness. Even if he didn't recover from his illness, if he and Wei Wei Bai had children, then this child would probably be snatched away by Mother Lu. He was disheartened by his mother because the person she liked was Yuanda. She had always wanted to have a good relationship with the royal family. And in her eyes, Yuanda was the best daughter-in-law. Chapter 2788. If Wei Wei Bai was pregnant, then this child would be an important weapon for his mother to force him to marry Yuanda. Because at that time, if he married this princess, it would be fine even if he didn't touch the princess. The child would be Wei Wei Bai. When Lu Xinglan thought of this, his eyes became gloomy and ruthless. That was a good plan. However, the Lu family and the royal family had long been at odds. If this emperor was a law-abiding person who guarded the country, the Lu family could still survive. However, Yuan Xian's ambition was simply carved on his face. If this kind of tyrant obtained power, it was expected that the southern country would be plunged into misery and suffering. As long as he was around, he would suppress the royal family. Otherwise, the world that the Lu family had fought for generations would rot just like that. The tip of Lu Xinglan's pen fell on the map and continued to draw. Cousin, a weak voice called out softly. Lu Xinglan's pen stopped and his eyes darkened. Xian Wu had just gone to Mother Lu's place when this so-called cousin came. Did she know that there was no one guarding his courtyard? Lu Xinglan didn't say anything and just looked at the door indifferently. He saw his cousin, who was dressed in white, standing there. He had forgotten her name. He only knew that she was a close and especially distant relative of Mother Lu. They had barely seen each other. His cousin was as thin as a sheet of paper. She took out a handkerchief and pressed it to her mouth, coughing weakly. I heard that cousin's condition has improved, so I specially came to visit cousin. Lu Xinglan looked at her indifferently and put down the pen in his hand. Then, he casually took a white handkerchief and slowly wiped his hands. The man was dressed in black and stood under the light. Under his thick eyelashes, his eyes were deep and clear. His handsome face was like that of a young man, with a trace of coldness and exquisiteness. His cousin looked at him with a trace of amazement in her eyes. Originally, she only coveted the power and status of the Lu family. She had never seen Lu Xinglan's face before. Now that she met him, she realized that this man was so handsome. His cousin's voice became even softer. "Cousin," Lu Xinglan said coldly, "have you seen enough? I'm not dead. I don't need you to cry at my funeral. You can leave." Her voice was so weak. It was extremely uncomfortable to hear. Those who didn't know better would think that it was a wild ghost crying at the grave. The cousin's smile stiffened, and she was about to step into the house. However, Lu Xinglan said coldly, "I'm not sick. It's better if you don't come in." His cousin's footsteps paused as she recalled the various vicious rumors about him. "I heard that he even kicked the princess out today." It was extremely terrifying. If she walked in, would she be kicked out by Lu Xinglan? The cousin immediately stopped in place. She thought for a while, then steeled her heart and said softly, "Cousin, I haven't seen you in a long time. Can we talk through the candlelight, under the moonlight?" Lu Xinglan gave her a sideways glance. A candlelight talk. Under the moonlight. Was this cousin raised in a brothel? How could he say such a shameless line? This wasn't something his woman should say. The younger cousin smiled gently. "Since I've moved into the Lu family, I'm a member of the Lu family. I know that I'm not worthy of the position of the main wife. A concubine is enough." Lu Xinglan was expressionless. There wasn't even a perfunctory response. When the cousin saw that he had no reaction, she immediately reached out to hold her forehead and stumbled over the threshold. She took a few steps forward, then suddenly fell forward. She was about to fall into Lu Xinglan's arms. However, the man took a few steps back unhurriedly. Chapter 2789. He perfectly avoided all of her attacks. The cousin fell heavily to the ground. She immediately put on a good posture and reached out to hold her forehead. Cousin, my old problem is acting up again. I faint at the touch of wind." Lu Xinglan lowered his eyes and looked at her coldly. The heavy smell of sandalwood in the room. It made his physiological reaction less intense. But when he saw the woman enter this room, he still began to feel disgusted. Lu Xinglan stared at the woman at his feet. After thinking for a while, he suddenly turned around and took the long sword on the wall. "Cousin," he said softly and calmly. The cousin immediately looked up in surprise. But she saw Lu Xinglan begin to draw the sword. The eerie light of the sword reflected the man's delicate features. "When I meet a woman, I start to lose control and want to kill." "No," he slowly corrected himself, his thin lips rising ferociously. "Yes, it's killing a woman." Before the sword completely left the scabbard, the cousin had already jumped up from the ground with a pale face and quickly fled outside. "Madman, you madman." Lu Xinglan held the sword and almost rolled his eyes. He wanted Axian Wu to sweep the floor. The floor was dirty because of that woman. Just as he was thinking this, he saw a familiar figure from the corner of his eye. The lantern outside the door illuminated a small area of the ground. The girl who had finished bathing was standing under the lantern, wearing a light sandalwood skirt and a light-colored wide-sleeved top. Her black hair was wet, and there was a light green copper coin grass that had just been picked by her ear. The round green copper leaves were also stained with mist. It was as beautiful as her eyes when she peeked inside. She met his eyes, was stunned, and immediately looked away. The sinister smile on Lu Xinglan's lips stiffened, and the eerie long sword in his hand was still half outside. He was no different from a madman who wanted to go to the battlefield to kill people. Right, his reputation on the battlefield was at its worst, and he was nicknamed by the people of the Northern Kingdom. Most of them were evil slaughterer, crazy butcher, and so on. Because he went to the battlefield, people went crazy. Except for his own people, he would kill whoever came. This made his murderous aura abnormally heavy. The sandalwood was also calming and suppressing. It gave him a boost of murderous aura. Could it be that he had scared her? Lu Xinglan pursed his lips and pulled away his sinister smile. After that, he stiffened for a moment before swiftly sheathing his sword. Then, he didn't say anything. Instead, he silently threw the sword on the table. It was only right for her to be afraid of him. It would be strange if no one was afraid of someone like him. Lu Xinglan thought coldly. Would he be scared away? Lu Xinglan's body stiffened, and she stopped herself from turning back to look. So what if he ran away? Suddenly, there was a rustling sound. He quickly turned around. Did she really run away? However, he saw Wei Wei Bai walking in softly with her head lowered, lifting her skirt, revealing half of her beautiful embroidered shoes. She didn't have much of an expression on her face. She just calmly called out, "Young master." Her voice was soft, but very pleasant to the ears. Lu Xinglan stared blankly at her damp hair and didn't say anything. She was afraid of him. Otherwise, why would it be so awkward? He turned his head to the side and his expression immediately darkened. But he heard the girl's soft whisper behind him. "Young master, are you planning to take in another concubine?" He stopped in his tracks. The girl's seductive voice was almost inaudible. "Under the moonlight, we talk through the night." Lu Xinglan's gloomy expression almost collapsed. He turned his head and saw the girl with her head lowered. Her drooping eyelashes were full of tears. She blinked, as if she wanted to wipe away the tears in her eyes. Wei Wei Bai secretly wiped away her tears. She didn't look up and just revealed a forced smile. "Young master, it's natural for you to have other women. But your illness has only just recovered. You can't take in too many concubines at once. It's not good for your health." At this point, a tear fell from her eyes. She immediately wiped it away, afraid that someone would see it. A slender finger suddenly and gently brushed past her reddened eyes. The girl looked up blankly. But she saw Lu Xinglan standing in front of her, looking at her with his head lowered. She didn't know if it was because of the candlelight, but the man's eyes had an extra layer of gentle light. His voice was low and unbelievably gentle. "I won't take in any more concubines. //. Chapter 2790. Not being disgusted by her was already the limit. He couldn't imagine other women getting close to him without being disgusted. As soon as he finished, Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. She suddenly hugged his waist and rested her face on his chest. Her voice trembled. "Young master," Lu Xinglan felt the girl's freshness after bathing staining his clothes and skin. Even his gloomy mood turned for the better. His deep eyes softened, and a trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his lips. He slowly reached out and was about to hug her awkwardly. However, he heard Xian Wu's cold voice. "I've brought it." Wei Wei Bai left his body with a whoosh. Lu Xinglan's fingers froze in mid-air and he remained silent. Then, he turned around and said to Xian Wu, "Leave it first. I'll bring it to her room tomorrow." Xian Wu said, "Oh, I've put it away. Your mother even asked me to bring a bowl of soup. She said it's good for the body." Lu Xinglan didn't want to drink it. However, when he thought of Wei Wei Bai's small body and cold hands and feet, he felt that her body was too weak and needed nourishment. He pretended to cough lightly. "Bring it in." Then, he turned around to look at Wei Wei Bai. He found that the girl was leaning to one side with her head lowered. He could only see that the tips of her ears were slightly red under the light green copper coin grass. It was unusually soft and cute. He looked at her deeply and said softly, "Drink with me." Wei Wei Bai glanced back at him secretly. She didn't refuse and nodded lightly. She said to the system, "There's supper, hee hee." The system said, "Eat hard. Do your best." His fridge was full of supper. He couldn't finish it. Fortunately, the side missions hadn't come yet. He still had time to digest. Bai Weiwei reservedly sat at the table, waiting to drink the soup. Lu Xinglan scooped the soup for himself. He was used to doing it at the border. Back in the capital, although he still had the aura of a prince from a big family, he didn't have so many bad habits. He deliberately gave Bai Weiwei a little more soup. This small body needed to eat more meat to add more meals. Weiwei Bai blushed and dared not raise her head to drink. The taste of this soup was a little rich. She raised her eyebrows and seemed to be a little hot. Did old Mother Lu put an aphrodisiac in the soup? So despicable. Yes, she liked it. Lu Xinglan also drank 2 mouthfuls. The taste was very strong, but she did not know what to put in. He didn't have much of a reaction, but he felt that the taste of this soup was unfamiliar. He had never tasted this soup before. He asked casually, "What soup is this?" If it was effective in nourishing the body, he could continue to cook it for Weiwei Bai in the future. Xan Wu was incomparably calm. Tiger penis. The two of them stopped drinking the soup. Expressionless fifth Axion continued to add, paired with caterpillar fungus, velvet antler, goat kidney, and a series of other tonics. Your mother said that if soup alone is too bland, then she'll order someone to make a dog meat hot pot for you. Lu Xinglan stopped drinking her soup. Weiwei Bai was faster, and the bowl was almost empty. The two of them fell silent. Xan Wu's expression was calm. The atmosphere became even more silent. Smoke rose from the soup. Lu Xinglan suddenly put down the spoon calmly and said unusually calmly, "You can't drink too much of this. It's too nutritious. Take it away." Drinking such a hot thing on an empty stomach. It was not good for women. Then he ordered someone to cook millet porridge and bring it up. Weiwei Bai felt that they were especially calm, so she should be calm too. After all, a pure girl would not understand the effects of this thing and what it was for. Chapter 2791. She put down the spoon and said to the system, "Why don't you tell me what this soup is made of?" The system said, "I can't say." "Isn't this a beeping organ?" I said, "It's automatically blocked." Weiwei Bai, this blocking system was so crazy that it couldn't even talk about animals. Then how did the animal world broadcast it? Lu Xinglan was very calm. He glanced at Weiwei Bai from the corner of his eyes. He saw that she was confused and didn't seem to know what was going on. He sighed in relief. Then, he calmly reached out his hand and carelessly smoothed his hair to cover his red ears. The millet porridge supper was very good for the stomach. After the supper, Lu Xinglan let her sit at the long table. There were a few boxes of girls' jewelry on it. The rouge and powder were newly bought. When she heard that it was Lu Mother who remembered Bai Weiwei's contributions, she asked the maid to get some for her. The brocade dresses were all placed in the outer room. It was not easy to put them in if they were too big. Lu Xinglan said calmly, "Look at those you don't like and throw them away." Afraid that she would feel uncomfortable, he said calmly, "I'll go take a bath first. You can look at them yourself." After that, he turned and walked out. After he walked out, he paused for a while before quietly turning back. He hid in the shadows and looked into the room. Under the dim yellow light, the girl sat on the overly wide sandalwood chair. She leaned against the table and carefully took out a golden butterfly hairpin decorated with red tourmaline. She seemed to be curious and pointed at the butterfly. The butterfly shook a little. It was very cute. She couldn't help but tilt her body and reveal a happy smile. The candlelight was delicate and soft. The girl's eyes were soft and beautiful. Lu Xinglan looked at it in a daze and couldn't help but smile. Then he turned and left. As long as you like it. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 30. Wei Wei Bai pointed at the jewelry. How much can these things be sold for? They're made of gold and this hairpin is pure silver. If I melt it, I can get some broken pieces of silver. The system fell silent as it looked at the pile of golden hairpins. The wages of craftsmanship were even more expensive than the materials. Host can actually look at such an exquisite and beautiful object. How could he say such unscrupulous words? Wei Wei Bai added, I think we can melt all of this gold and make a set of 10 caddies of gold bracelets. It will definitely look very good when worn. The system remained calm. The host's sense of beauty had been completely corrupted by money. He shouldn't have been surprised. Because a 10-kilogram golden chain seemed to be quite pretty. It was filled with the fragrance of money. The bathing place was a huge soaking pool made of wooden planks. Amidst the warm steam, Lu Xinglan lowered her head, and her black hair fell on the water. He furrowed his brows and pursed his thin lips, which were abnormally red. The man's face was covered in sweat, and his cheeks were flushed. He seemed to have thought of something. He lowered his head and endured. Was it because men had a stronger reaction to these nourishing soups? Lu Xinglan didn't know what to do, but she thought of the girl leaning on the chair and holding the butterfly hairpin. She smiled sweetly, and her fair wrists were exposed from the wide sleeves. That patch of fair skin on her wrists. Fair wrists. Lu Xinglan's nose heated up. He reached out and touched it. Fortunately, there was no nosebleed. It was just that his qi and blood had been used, and his breath had heated up. Lu Xinglan immediately used his internal energy to suppress the thoughts in his head. Slash. Chapter 2792. He couldn't stop himself from touching her wrist. It was simply too strange. Lu Xinglan, who had never touched a woman before, felt the pain of touching a woman's hand for the first time. He stepped out of the warm pool, then squatted by the wooden pool and splashed his head with cold water. Xian Wu asked from outside, "Did you use too much nourishment?" Lu Xinglan froze in his actions. Xian Wu asked, "Do you need some ice water?" Lu Xinglan, Xian Wu said, "I know these things. Do you want me to teach you?" Lu Xinglan finally looked up fiercely and asked through gritted teeth, "What do you know?" Xian Wu said coldly, "Every time after a battle, don't the soldiers take the reward money and go find the women in the brothel?" Lu Xinglan pursed his lips and suddenly said coldly, "Don't compare this." He didn't want to hear it. He mentioned Wei Wei Bai and the brothel together. A murderous intent surged in his heart. Xian Wu was silent for a moment and then asked, "You seem to treat your wife like this." Only the wife was humiliated. Only men would be so angry. Lu Xinglan was stunned. He didn't think much about whether she was the wife or not. Because women were too disgusting for him. Finally, there was a delicate Wei Wei Bai. But he found that girls didn't seem as disgusting as he thought. But the wife? Lu Xinglan knew the weight of this position, so he didn't put her in this position for a while. Xian Wu didn't say anything. Lu Xinglan was silent for a while. After calming down, he grabbed his clothes, put them on, and disappeared into the bathroom. Lu Xinglan returned to the room and saw the girl sitting on the edge of the bed, gently bending down to take off her shoes. Her beautiful and thin back had a trace of clothes because of the bend, which made her soft waist even more obvious. Lu Xinglan even saw that there seemed to be a belt around her neck under her clothes. What kind of clothes needed a belt around the neck? The man was a little confused. After the girl took off her shoes, her thin and white instep and her slender ankles were exposed. They were too delicate. They couldn't stand being dirty at all. Wei Wei Bai seemed to sense his gaze. She looked up and smiled softly. "Young master." Lu Xinglan's breath warmed up, and she immediately said in a muffled voice, "Okay, let's sleep." Wei Wei Bai nodded and gently placed her feet on the lake green bed. It was so white that it was shining. Lu Xinglan glanced at him and immediately turned away to look at the top of the bed. She had already gone to get a thinner blanket, rolled it up bit by bit, and then isolated it in the middle. It was still the part of her that was small, almost the same size as her body. The outer side of the bed was very empty. Lu Xinglan didn't say a word. She watched her actions and didn't say anything. After all, if he directly told her not to roll up the blanket and isolate herself, it would seem too lecherous. Therefore, Lu Xinglan held it in and didn't say a word. Wei Wei Bai lightly yawned and pulled over her little blanket. She laid her head on the pillow and softly said, "Young master, if you feel nauseous, remember to tell me. I will try my best to stay away from you. If your condition worsens, you can also throw me to the ground." At this point, a trace of naive gentleness appeared on the girl's face. "Young master is more important." Lu Xinglan didn't say anything. Instead, he pursed his lips in silence. He saw her thick eyelashes drooping, as if she was about to fall asleep. Lu Xinglan could only reach out and flicked his fingers to extinguish a few candles. Only a lamp at the door and a red candle beside the bed were left on. Under the faint light, Lu Xinglan lay on the bed. He half closed his eyes and tried hard to wait. /save button. Chapter 2793. He could hear the girl's shallow breathing next door. His body stiffened. It was like lying in the cold snow, waiting for the enemy to arrive. That feeling. It tested his endurance and stamina. Although it didn't require much stamina here, it seemed to test his endurance even more. Why wasn't she sleeping yet? She seemed to be unable to bear it and turned over. Her small body curled up. The blanket moved along with her. Lu Xinglan remained silent and continued to wait. When she fell asleep, he could remove the eyesore in the middle of the blanket. Moreover, she was not a good sleeper and was in a deep sleep. She would roll over on her own accord. When that time came, he could touch her. It wouldn't be considered his fault. Lu Xinglan tried his best to wait and wait. She carefully turned over and seemed to be holding her breath. She seemed to be afraid of waking him up. Lu Xinglan stared at the top of the bed expressionlessly. Why, wasn't she sleeping yet? He held his breath and didn't say anything. Then, he carefully looked to the side to see what was wrong with her. However, when he turned his eyes, he saw Wei Wei Bai with her eyes wide open. The corners of her eyes were red and her face was moist, just like her peach blossom cheeks. Lu Xinglan frowned and immediately got up to touch her face. It was terrifyingly hot. Wait a minute, those tonics should be more effective on men. Her body was cold. Why was her reaction so big? Wei Wei Bai seemed to be a little confused. Why, young master? Did I wake you up? In the dim light, the man's expression was terrifyingly serious. He stared at her for a while before saying helplessly, "Don't hold it like this in the future." With that said, he got off the bed and went to find an ice basin. There was a large piece of ice in the basin. Lu Xinglan expressionlessly smashed it with his palm. Then, he took a cotton handkerchief and wrapped it around the ice. Then, he reached out and brushed away the stray hair in front of her forehead with his fingers, placing the ice on her forehead. She was heating up. He was cooling her down. Wei Wei Bai stared at him, her gaze soft and dazed. She was like an insensible child, hiding her discomfort and thinking that no one would find out. Lu Xinglan was about to condemn her, but he paused for a moment. He covered her face with ice for a while. After making sure that the redness at the corners of her eyes had subsided a little, he removed the ice that was beginning to melt. The weather is so hot. Furthermore, he had eaten something that was extremely nutritious. It was harmful and not beneficial. He coldly ordered the people outside, warm water, towels, and bitter medicine to reduce the heat. Bitterness and anger. Especially in this kind of summer, among all the medicines that could reduce internal heat, the bitter taste was definitely the best. The items were brought over. Lu Xinglan slowly fed Wei Wei Bai water. The medicine was still brewing. In the deep night, the air was filled with a bitter medicinal fragrance. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. She was lying on the bed like a soft blanket. Her face was beginning to regain its color, and there was a fragile beauty to it. Lu Xinglan's brows were still furrowed as she sat by the bed. Her gloomy eyes were filled with worry. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly for a while. Only then did she reach out and gently hook his fingertips. "Young master," her voice was trembling, but it was filled with unconcealable affection. "You're such a good person. You're really a good person." This was a sentence that Lu Xinglan was not unfamiliar with. Many commoners had sincerely said this to him, who had won many battles. In the end, it was not as shocking as her weak gaze and weak praise. Lu Xinglan looked at her for a long time before finally sighing and gently stroking the ends of her beautiful eyes. His voice was low and gentle. "Sleep, I'm here." The night gradually darkened. The man's back was facing the candlelight. In the darkness, his eyes seemed to contain the broken light of stars. He gently bent his fingers and held her fingertips in his palm, tightening it little by little. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 35. // comma. Chapter 2794. Wei Wei Bai stayed up all night before she finally got over it. The medicine was extremely bitter. Lu Xinglan's expression was gentle, but his fingers were firm as he forced her down. When she woke up, she only had one thought. Was he still a man? Such a good opportunity. Why don't you go? Important things must be said 3 times. She even asked the system to give her some system chocolate, afraid that the tonic wasn't enough. She almost pounced on him. However, every time she moved, Lu Xinglan would hold her hand down calmly, using a very polite gesture to isolate her. He ensured that she was like an overturned crab, absolutely unable to jump up. Wei Wei Bai thought, "You're not a man. You're a eunuch. You're asexual. Your masculine spirit must have been castrated." Wei Wei Bai touched her face worriedly. "Am I not good-looking enough? System, here comes the host again. Once you're not good-looking, you feel that your appearance is not good enough. What's the use of appearance? Personality is the key. The host's performance is based on appearance. It's not based on beauty." Wei Wei Bai had already returned to her room, which looked brand new. Perhaps Axian Wu felt that he didn't understand girls' decorations, so he went to look at the boudoirs of those rich families silently. He remembered that girls needed good-looking screens, dressing tables, vases, zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, ink, paper, flowers, jewelry, and rouge. Even the bed had to be fucking embroidered by the best embroiderer, exquisite and beautiful. Anyway, no matter what, everything should be arranged to look good. XAN we thought, women are pretentious. So Wei Wei Bai's room was now more or less like a lady's boudoir. Even the jewelry was from XAN Wu's inner chamber, choosing the best. He was good at nothing else, but he was good at judging the price. As for whether it looked good or not. How could the most expensive not look good? Of course it would look good. Mother Lu's heart ached, but XAN Wu was Lu Xinglan's important confidant, and also one of the super generals on the battlefield. He was Lu Xinglan's personal bodyguard. His identity and status were very transcendent. Even Mother Lu couldn't command him. They could only stare at him and watch him take away all the most expensive items in the palace treasury. Wei Wei Bai looked at the room full of jewelry that exuded the fragrance of gold and heard about XAN Wu's hard work. He felt that Lu Xinglan was not a man. His woman's belongings were actually picked by another man. XAN Wu was the target, right? What's this about aesthetics and consideration? He was 10,000 times better than that castrated man, Lu Xinglan. Wei Wei Bai hugged the gold jewelry and said, "Sigh, I think XAN Wu is much more handsome." The system said, "Wake up, you're talking about the male lead of your strategy." Wei Wei Bai held the gold jewelry box in her hands. "Do I look handsome?" The system was silent for a while, then said, "Yes, you are indeed much more handsome." Wei Wei Bai was relieved. Tong Zi's aesthetic standards had indeed improved a lot under her influence. After Lu Xinglan finished practicing, he sheathed his sword. Then, he walked to the edge of the martial field, beside the purple jasmine flowers. Behind the flowers was a long corridor under the roof. In the corridor was Wei Wei Bai's boudoir. Her boudoir was slightly higher. He looked up and saw the semicircular window. The window was half open, and there were red balsamine flowers in it. Lu Xinglan saw a slender figure leaning against the window, picking the balsamine flowers in the vase. His eyesight was very good, and he could see the delicate touch of the halo on the girl's beautiful face. Her hair was tied up and pinned with a golden hairpin, as well as a few elegant pink flowers. It was very beautiful. Chapter 2795. She plucked enough petals and crushed them. Then, she carefully applied nail polish to her nails. Lu Xinglan didn't know what she was doing and watched in confusion. Did she get flowers on her nails? However, he felt that the girl leaning against the window lazily extended her slender fingers and smeared the red juice on her nails. Her actions were exceptionally charming. XAN Wu stood silently by his side. Lu Xinglan suddenly turned around and looked at him from head to toe before saying, "Can you stay away from me when I'm looking at people?" XAN Wu's face was expressionless. "What if you die?" Lu Xinglan, XAN Wu said, "Although it looks safe here, who knows if there are assassins in the flowers, sharpshooters on the roof, and traps under your feet. I have to be careful." Lu Xinglan. "It's not that bad." XAN Wu snorted expressionlessly. "Never underestimate how hostile your enemies are to you. Tell me, how many people have a grudge against you?" Lu Xinglan really thought about it. Only the imperial family. The rest didn't seem to be that many. XAN Wu said, "The imperial family, both inside and outside, has about 500 to 600 people. If you include the palace maids and eunuchs, even 1,000 or 2,000 would be too little." "You still think it's too little?" Lu Xinglan's expression also froze. Then, she said lightly, "You don't look at my woman." XAN Wu squinted. "If not, why would I look at her? Is she beautiful?" Lu Xinglan was silent for a long time before saying faintly, "Do you think she's beautiful?" Xan Wu, she's quite beautiful. Lu Xinglan slowly pulled out the sword in her hand. Let's compare notes so that our martial arts don't deteriorate and we don't know if the enemy has dug a hole under our feet. Xan Wu, what did he say wrong? Wasn't praising his woman the same as praising him? It was rare for him to get angry just from flattery. What kind of person was this? Lu Xinglan was still slashing at Xan Wu. Wei Bai finished painting her nails when Madame Lu's servant came. She smiled gently and followed Madame Lu's servant out. Madame Lu's house was some distance away from Lu Xinglan's courtyard. And it was especially big. The furnishings in the house were also very rich. Mother Lu was sitting on a chair, and beside her were 6 female servants. Fanning, peeling grapes, hammering feet, adding ice cubes. There was also one who was holding a fruit. It seemed to be to ensure that the house had the fragrance of flowers and fruits. He lived a more carefree life than the emperor. Wei Bai flipped through some of Mother Lu's information. She knew that Mother Lu had lived in the capital for a long time and had a lot of extravagance in the capital. Moreover, he was too close to the royal family. The imperial family had been using all kinds of bribes to corrupt Mother Lu's consciousness. Now, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Mother Lu was half a spy for the royal family. The scary thing was that Mother Lu didn't think that she was a spy. Instead, she thought that she was mixed up with the royal family and was wholeheartedly good to her son. There were many people in the royal family who were trying to brainwash her. Since ancient times, very few generals whose achievements shook the emperor had a good ending. But the new emperor was merciful. If the Lu family could hand over their power, the emperor would be merciful. If the royal family was willing to let the princess marry into the Lu family would be a relative of the royal family. They would be a family, so of course, they wouldn't have any dangerous thoughts about Lu Xinglan. When Mother Lu entered the family, she was just a daughter of a small family and didn't have a big vision. When she was young, she handed Lu Xinglan over to the royal family once. Later on, if it wasn't for the loyal subordinates of the Lu family who couldn't stand it and took her away to the border. Chapter 2796. Lu Xinglan's grave was already taller than a person. That was why Lu Xinglan and Mother Lu were estranged. After Wei Bai flipped through the information, she looked at Mother Lu sympathetically. What kind of brain did she have? The royal family wanted to destroy the Lu family. If Lu Xinglan handed over her military power, she would be cut into pieces. Mother Lu actually thought that she could become a part of the royal family. Wasn't she asking for a beating? It wasn't easy for Lu Xinglan either. Even her mother wasn't reliable. Who else was unreliable? She was the most reliable. After all, her goal was to love him. She could guarantee that when he saw her, it was as if he saw a shield stronger than a 10-meter thick city wall. The system heard the host's self-evaluation. It held it in and didn't say anything. When the side mission came. You were the main character, the 100-meter-long blade that stabbed people a few times every day and didn't allow them to heal. Wei Bai bowed politely and lowered her head to greet her. Mother Lu smiled and sipped her tea unhurriedly, showing her arrogance. She didn't ask Wei Bai to get up, but there was a hint of contempt in her voice. Did you succeed last night? Wei Bai looked up blankly and said, Madam, what happened? Mother Lu narrowed her eyes, thinking that she was pretending. Last night, she ate more than half of the tonics that she brought. She spent the night in Lu Xinglan's room. The maid who peeped in the morning saw Xan Wu carrying the messy bedding to wash. If this wasn't a success, then what was? If it was a success, it meant that her son could get close to women. So, his illness was definitely cured. It was fine as long as he could get close to women. Bai Weiwei saw Mother Lu's cold gaze, as cold as a pile of ice shards. Why did this old witch feel like she was here to pick a fight? Mother Lu gave a perfunctory smile. It seems that the young master has recovered. It's all thanks to you. Someone, give her a bowl of lychee soup. This thing is very rare, and only the imperial consecrators have it. The royal family's royal family. But the Lu family did. Who would believe that Mother Lu was not in cahoots with the royal family? Madame Lu looked like she had a seal on her forehead that said she was the Empress Dowager. Seeing Mother Lu proudly talking about the offerings, she knew that she especially enjoyed the royal family's flattery. Immediately, a maidservant brought in a bowl of peeled lychees, covered with crushed ice, crushed fruits, and honey water. This thing looked really good. As expected of a royal consecrator. She also wanted to rebel after seeing him. Weiwei Bai naturally had to be polite. She immediately took a few steps back with a panicked look on her face. This is too expensive. This servant doesn't dare to eat it. Mother Lu snorted coldly. Just eat it. What are you talking about? If you don't want to eat, then force it down. Weiwei Bai asked the system, is this thing poisoned? Don't let this old lady say all the villainous lines. You're forcing it. The system took a look and said, oh, there's a secret medicine added to it. If someone takes it, they'll be infertile. If someone takes it, they'll be infertile. Weiwei Bai said, that's all. The system said, that's all. What else do you want? It's already hard enough that the secret medicine can come up with one effect. Do you really think there's an all-purpose poison? Weiwei Bai said, wait, didn't this old lady want to have children? Why did she give me this thing? The system said, when the royal family sent the lychees this morning, they said that if the male lead recovers, he can have children with the princess. Other people's children are not pure blood, so they don't want them. Download the at https://m/sashu.com save button to record this chapter. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2797. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to Sashu.com on Baidu to find the S. Weiwei Bai understood. The royal family was a troublemaker. She hesitated for a while before accepting the bowl of lychees. Thank you for the gift, madam. She said in a low voice. Madame Lu smiled coldly and said in a kind tone, eat, good girl. You're Xinglan's concubine after all, you won't be mistreated later. If the princess was unhappy about having another concubine, she would just beat her to death to make the princess happy. Weiwei Bai picked up the spoon and scooped up a lychee. It looked delicious. Although it was hot. But it was sweet. She was about to eat when the system said, by some more time, the male lead is coming to save you. When Bai Weiwei heard this, she immediately stuffed the lychee into her mouth. The speed at which he ate was extremely fast. The system said, wait, why are you eating this? You'll break the bowl, you'll be infertile. Weiwei Bai swallowed the lychee, when have I ever been pregnant? The system paused, that's right, the host is infertile. What's the difference between eating this and not eating it? Weiwei Bai said, if I don't eat quickly, there won't be any left when Lu Xinglan comes. The system suddenly realized, then eat quickly, she's almost there, there's only 10 seconds left. Eat one every second. Weiwei Bai looked elegant, but she ate one lychee with each bite. The core was already removed. It was sweet and cold. The next time she cooked it, she had to make 3 pounds, or she wouldn't be full. She was about to eat the last lychee. She was about to eat the last honey-colored fruit. Don't waste. It's shameful to waste, you know. She was such a virtuous person, she always knew shame. Lu Xinglan just received news from the royal family. In the morning, the royal family sent a basket of lychees and a few carts of ice to the Lu family. He only raised his eyebrows calmly when he heard this. After all, this was the royal family's usual routine. Madame Lu accepted the news happily. He was silent for a while, but in the end, he only smiled coldly and said nothing. But when he saw the royal family's secret medicine in the basket of lychees, he frowned. Child-severing soup. Xan Wu reminded him, to prevent some concubines from having children, it was specially developed to prevent them from having children. Lu Xinglan didn't realize who it was for. The poison wouldn't kill anyone. He thought for a while and suddenly looked up at Wei Wei Bai's room. Inside the door and beside the window, that beautiful figure had long since disappeared. He had just sparred with Xan Wu and checked the news from the royal family. He didn't notice that Wei Wei Bai was missing for a while. Xan Wu immediately went to inquire about it. When he came back, he said, "It's with your mother. The medicine should be for her." Lu Xinglan's mind turned, and her dark eyes were filled with a thick murderous aura and ruthlessness. She dares. These words were directed at his mother. He had always known what kind of person his mother was, but he had never expected anything from her. As long as they didn't drag him down, he would be on his guard. In the future, when the dust settled, she would give up on relying on the royal family. Who would have thought that she would be so deeply corrupted by the royal family? Lu Xinglan turned and rushed to Mother Lu's room. His fingers were trembling. This was different from the cold and solemn mood he had when he was on the battlefield. But the feeling was the same in the end. He wanted to kill someone. He quickly kicked away several maids who tried to stop him and directly kicked open the door. He saw Wei Wei Bai standing there. Her delicate side profile was exceptionally cute. She was holding a small jade bowl in her hand and eating unhurriedly. The bowl was already empty. Lu Xinglan stopped in his tracks. His black eyes were full of ferocious blood vessels. His mind was blank. When he stepped into the room, his fingers couldn't help but hold on to the horizontal bar by the door. It seemed that all his strength had disappeared. There was only one thought that made his ears ring. It was too late. Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw Lu Xinglan standing against the light by the door. The man's slender figure was like a cold blade that had been unsheathed. It was full of vicious and violent murderous aura. The smile that was about to rise at the corner of her mouth froze. She was just about to ask what happened. Suddenly, a trace of blood overflowed from her mouth. Then, drop by drop, the blood gathered into a line. The girl blankly reached out to touch her lips. Her hand was full of blood. The bowl in her hand fell to the ground. Stained with blood, it looked like a flower that had bloomed. Chapter 2798. Wei Wei Bai stood there in a daze. Her hands covering her mouth were stained with blood. She seemed a little strange. She couldn't even react. She could only watch. She even wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She looked unusually calm. In the eyes of others, she was just scared silly. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of her. He paused at the door just now, but in half a second, he was already beside her. The man's neck was lowered. Because he ran too fast, a few strands of hair fell from his temples in a mess. He looked a little embarrassed. His eyes in the shadows were scarlet. His thin lips were tightly pursed. They were so red that they looked like they were about to bleed. Wei Wei Bai seemed to come back to her senses. She quickly wiped the blood from her mouth and said strangely, "I don't know why, but this is an inauspicious sign." It's rare for the old madam to see me. I'm too rude. Suddenly, the girl's words stopped. Lu Xinglan reached out and gently touched her cheek. There was a trace of blood on his fingertips. Then, he slowly went to the back of her neck and gently touched it. Then, he took a step forward and pressed her face to his shoulder. It was as gentle as touching his own child. His low and hoarse voice was holding back something, but it was unusually calm. Don't be afraid, I'm here. Bai Weiwei's whole body stiffened. She seemed to realize what he had said. Finally, she opened her blood-stained lips, and a sad voice choked out from her throat. Her tears fell without warning. Lu Xinglan felt her whole body trembling, but she didn't dare to cry out loud. She was not a fool. She knew that something was wrong with the thing she ate. Lu Xinglan could hardly imagine what kind of mood she had to say that she was inauspicious. The power of an aristocratic family, a huge monster. She was a small servant. Even if she was poisoned. She was beaten to death. After she died, she was casually thrown into a mass grave and eaten by wild dogs. No one pitied her. Lu Xinglan lowered his eyes. His fingers touched her head unhurriedly, and his other hand landed gently on her back. This kind of medicine couldn't be turned back once it was eaten. He couldn't force the poison out either. His true qi entered her body only to make her feel better. Then, he picked her up without saying a word. He didn't even look at Mother Lu. The maid beside Mother Lu came over and said respectfully, "Young master, this is..." He didn't even finish his sentence. Lu Xinglan kicked the maid away. He finally looked up at Mama Lu, who was sitting in the middle with a dark expression. "Mother." His voice was cold and indifferent, chilling to the bone. "Do you think that because I've recovered, my medicine is useless and needs to be thrown away?" Mother Lu furrowed her brows. She slapped the armrest of the chair and said angrily, "What's wrong with you? How dare you kick my servant? Are you trying to embarrass me?" Lu Xinglan hugged the person in her arms and felt that her body was unusually cold. This kind of coldness went straight into his heart. He didn't lower his head to look at her. Instead, he stared at the small patch of ground that was stained red by her blood. Then, he said slowly, "Face. When you accept the large amount of wealth that the imperial family gives you every month and sell my message pen to them, where did you get the face to ask this?" Mother Lu's face turned pale and she immediately retorted in a panic, "What do you mean by betrayal? Child, how can you say that? I'm doing this for your own good. The emperor values the Lu family so much because of your mother's mediation." Lu Xinglan finally turned his eyes and his gaze slowly fell on his mother. /save button. Chapter 2799. His half-closed eyelashes covered most of the malevolence in his dark eyes, but it brought out a deeper hostility. "You're spending the royal family's share of the military budget. Have you seen what the royal family has been doing all these years?" Mother Lu was so angry that her whole body trembled. "You're simply rebelling. This world belongs to the royal family. What's wrong with eating a little military budget?" Lu Xinglan's beautiful and pale face revealed a trace of terrifying anger. "What's wrong with eating a little military budget? That's eating lives, drinking blood, and bones. Have you seen the situation of the frontier soldiers? Have you seen a soldier who still risked his life to kill the enemy on the battlefield before starving to death? This country does not belong to the royal family, nor does it only belong to the royal family. This is the sky that countless soldiers of the Lu family carry with their lives." Lu Xinglan's eyes were red. Towards the end, her throat was trembling. "Is your face used to hurt me, Mother?" His chest and abdomen were hurting. It wasn't that he hadn't seen his mother's style all these years. He had been stopping her. He had been trying to change her back. But step by step, her selfishness was incisive and vivid. He thought that it would be fine as long as he ignored it. But ignoring it brought about an even bigger mistake. Mother Lu was so frightened by his fierce gaze that her body trembled. Her mouth trembled, and she suddenly pointed at Wei Wei Bai and said, "You're just criticizing me for an insignificant servant. In your eyes, I'm not even comparable to a servant." After saying that, she sneered, "What a bitch, seducing the master. She deserves to be beaten to death. The medicine just now shouldn't have been a contraceptive medicine, but a life-threatening poison." These words were too vicious. Wei Wei Bai's fingers clutched Lu Xinglan's collar tightly. The blood on her fingertips soaked Lu Xinglan's clean collar. She was terrified. But suddenly, she raised her eyes slightly. A pair of eyes blurred by tears were filled with panic and guilt. "Young master, it's all my fault. Don't quarrel with your mother." Lu Xinglan's heart twisted. His thin lips also lost a trace of color, but he still smiled at her. In the next moment, he bent down, lowered his head, and sucked on her blood-stained lips. This kiss was light but full of the taste of blood. More than that, they trembled with pity. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 40. He had always been steady. Don't do such impulsive and irrational things. There were too many things in this world that forced him to remain calm. But when he met such a pair of pure eyes that only had his shadow in them, he felt only the anger of being thrown into the fire. Mrs. Lu was furious and threw a teacup at him. "Are you crazy, Lu Xinglan? What are you doing in broad daylight?" Lu Xinglan didn't move, allowing the fragments of the teacup to fly everywhere. One of the fragments cut his cheek, causing some blood to flow out. The person in his arms was not injured at all. He left the stunned girl and finally smiled. But his eyes were cold and filled with killing intent. "You want me to have descendants all your life, and you even want descendants of the royal family. If you like children so much, why don't you have one yourself?" When he said this, his smile turned cold. "Do you want me to help you find a few men to borrow your seed? Some of the children of the royal family should prefer the older ones. Why don't they give birth to their own children?" Mrs. Lu was so angry that she almost fainted on the spot. "Lu Xinglan, what are you talking about? I'm going to complain to the heavens and sue you for being unfilial." In the southern country, filial piety was respected. Who was unfilial? That was the biggest taboo. If an official was accused of being unfilial, they would lose their black veil. It was common for them to be directly sent to prison to eat. Chapter 2800. Lu Xinglan's eyes were downcast, and the trace of blood on his pure white face brought out the hostility in his entire body. He walked forward step by step. The servant girl was so frightened by his frightening aura that her legs went weak. Madame Lu sat up with difficulty. "What are you doing? Unfilial son, are you going to kill me?" Lu Xinglan reached out and pressed the back of the person in his arms, making her closer to him. He felt her rapid heartbeat and trembling in fear. This was the first time he wanted a girl to not be afraid. Therefore, his voice was suppressed and unusually calm. But it was cold and austere. It was like the remaining snow in a frozen sky, cold and fierce. "I don't dare to kill you. I just want to tell you that our Lu family will be extinct, and there will be no more descendants. From my generation onwards, the Lu family will have no descendants. The plaque on the Lu family will also be taken to the grave after I die." He said until here. His smile was cold. "After I die, there will be no one to worship, no one to worship, no one to burn paper offerings, and no one to remember." And this was the end of the entire Lu family. Lu Xinglan paused. He looked at Madame Lu's pale face and revealed a calm and gentle smile. Is this what you want? Madame Chin. Before Madame Lu joined the Lu family, her maiden name was Chin. After Lu Xinglan finished speaking, he took a few steps back and shouted coldly, "What are you waiting for? Beat these traitors to death." Xan Wu appeared at the door. More than a dozen burly servants followed behind him. They rushed into Madame Lu's room. Those female servants, as well as the servants who had been drugged, were all caught and dragged out. Lu Xinglan hugged the girl with his back to the light. His face in the shadow was handsome like a god, but cold like a demon. No need to drag them out, beat them to death on the spot. Madame Lu's fingers trembled, not from anger, but from fear. She stared into her son's eyes. Those eyes were like those of a demon, full of murderous intent. Soon, screams and the sound of sticks rang out, and the smell of blood filled the entire room. The blood on the floor began to flow. It covered the blood that Wei Wei Bai spat out. Lu Xinglan looked at Madame Lu calmly. It was as if he was looking at a piece of dead meat. He thought that Yuanda was the most disgusting piece of meat. He didn't expect that his mother was the same. Even more so than Yuanda. About a quarter of an hour passed. The screams slowly faded away. The supervising Xan Wu stood calmly in the pool of blood. He clasped his hands behind his back and straightened his back. He said expressionlessly, "The 18 people involved in this matter have all stopped breathing." Lu Xinglan's fingers gently stroked Wei Wei Bai's back. It was an exceptionally gentle gesture of comfort. He raised his head. There was no expression on his delicate face, and the darkness in his eyes was still there. However, her tone was soft and gentle. "In the future, this place will be your retirement home. You're old and your body isn't in good condition. Your brain is also affected by your body and you have all kinds of hallucinations. To prevent something from happening to you, I had no choice but to seal the door of your courtyard." At this point, a gentle smile appeared on Lu Xinglan's face. His tone was so calm that it made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "Do you think this is a good arrangement?" The Qin clan. Mother Lu's mouth moved, but she couldn't utter a single word. Her hands gripped the armrest of the chair tightly. Facing a room full of dead people. The blood flowed to her feet. Her feet trembled as she tried to move away, but she found that she didn't have any strength left. Lu Xinglan glanced at her indifferently. There was no love or hate. There was only indifference as cold as snow. Then, he turned around with the girl in his arms and walked out of the blood-stained ground without a care. His fingers kept stroking the back of the person in his arms, as if he was worried that she would be frightened. There. Chapter 28:01. Lu Xinglan had just walked out when Mother Lu released her fingers. She was paralyzed on the chair as if she was dead. Her feet were soaked in blood, and she was so scared that her whole body trembled. She wanted to call her unfilial son, but the words were choked in her throat and she almost died. Xan Wu walked over with a paralyzed face. "Do you need a doctor?" Mother Lu pointed at him with a trembling finger. Her face was red and she was about to speak. Xan Wu had already turned around. "It seems that your body is still strong. There's no need for a doctor." With that, he disappeared. He left a room full of corpses in the same room with Mother Lu. Mother Lu was stunned for a long time. The room was empty. The incense was still floating, but it couldn't hide the strong smell of blood. Finally, Mother Lu's scream came from the room. "Lu Xinglan, you unfilial son." Lu Xinglan walked out of the courtyard and still heard this sentence. He stopped in his tracks, but his expression didn't change at all. The girl in his arms was especially cold. It was the result of that drug destroying her body's chi and blood. She wouldn't have children in the future. Moreover, her hands and feet were cold all year round, and she would be especially weak due to chi deficiency. A drug that could directly cause a girl to lose her virginity must be a tyrannical drug. It didn't do the body any good. If she didn't take good care of herself, she would definitely be a medicine jar for the rest of her life. Lu Xinglan couldn't help but quicken his steps and finally arrived at his courtyard. He walked into the room and carefully put her on the bed. Wei Wei Bai was still a little sluggish. She didn't vomit blood again, but the blood at the corner of her lips was still there. A trace of heartache flashed in Lu Xinglan's eyes. He pursed his pale lips, and there was a trace of haggardness on his pale face. Then he immediately turned around and went out to get hot water. He took a clean towel, warmed it, and carefully wiped her face. The girl's face was pink and white, and there was no color in it. Her clear eyes turned slightly, as if she had finally returned to her senses. "Young master." Her voice was a little hoarse. "I'm fine." This sentence was light and indifferent. There was no resentment. Lu Xinglan didn't know why, but his nose felt sour. He immediately lowered his head to wash the handkerchief again. "With me here, nothing will happen." He did not dare to tell her what those drugs were for. To a woman, the end of her family line was the most terrifying and vicious curse. How could he bear to tell her this? She was still young. The most vicious thing had happened to her. Lu Xinglan's chest was filled with pain. But he couldn't explain what kind of feeling this was. There was guilt and pity. More than that, he felt a surge of helplessness in his heart when he saw that she was still forcing herself to remain calm after being injured. The girl's figure was still as soft as ever. "Young master, I won't have children in the future, right?" Lu Xinglan's fingers stiffened. Then, as if nothing had happened, she wrung the handkerchief dry. The warm handkerchief held her fingers. The blood on her fingers was stained with blood. It was like the color of impatience oil on her nails. When Wei Wei Bai saw this, she smiled. "Young master, this is the rouge flower juice that I made myself today. It can be used to apply nail polish. The color is very nice." It was the same color as the blood stains. However, she did not mention how much blood was on it. "Let's just talk about her rouge flower juice." Lu Xinglan's eyelashes trembled. His voice was hoarse. "It looks nice." He held her fingers. They were cold, but he couldn't warm them up no matter how hard he tried. He used a bit of true qi and channeled it into her fingertips bit by bit, warming her up bit by bit. "In the future," he said in a low voice, "your body will recover. I'll find a doctor for you." The man lowered his head and knelt on one knee by the bed. He was almost leaning against the girl. He did not raise his head. His dark eyes were half covered by his eyelids, hiding most of the broken light, leaving only an obscure darkness. Wei Wei Bai stared at his lowered face. A sweet smile appeared on her fair face. "Yes, I'll be healthy after seeing a doctor. Moreover, I'm still young. I'll live for a long, long time." A bitter smile appeared on Lu Xinglan's lips. Suddenly, the girl stretched out her other cold hand and gently placed it on his shoulder. She leaned over and her cold breath brushed past his ear. "I'm younger than you, so I'll live longer than you. So when you die, I'll worship you, and burn paper for you." Her voice was soft and cold. It was as light as smoke. But it was so heavy that Lu Xinglan suddenly raised his head and couldn't breathe properly. The girl in front of him smiled gently. Her eyes were sparkling and her snow-white face was breathtakingly beautiful. "I'll remember you, Lu Xinglan." Lu Xinglan stared at her for a long time. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 50. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here, / transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Button at the bottom to record your reading record. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Chapter 2802. The girl's gaze was like a flower and warm light. Lu Xinglan was speechless for a moment. His cold and dark eyes were filled with surging tides. Sourness spread to the corners of his eyes. He blinked with effort and pursed his thin lips tightly. In the end, he couldn't hold back the surging sourness in his heart and lowered his voice slightly. I'm such an unfilial person. I don't deserve to be worshipped in the future. He ended the Lu family's bloodline. It was natural for him to become a lonely soul after death. Wei Wei Bai's lips were wiped clean. Because of the loss of qi and blood, there was an unhealthy pink. Her charming eyes curved sweetly, and she stretched out her fingers to touch the fragile man in front of her tenderly. Her fingertips were cold, but the temperature of her voice was unusually comforting. You are worthy of the heavens, worthy of the earth, worthy of this country, and worthy of the people. I believe that the ancestors of the Lu family spent their lives to protect all of this and handed it to you. And you kept it. This is the greatest filial piety. Speaking of this, the girl's smile revealed a hint of bitterness. When I heard of your deeds in the past, I admired you very much. I felt that you were a great hero who protected the southern nation and also protected us little people. There was a hint of sorrowful pity in her eyes. Later, when I washed clothes in the snow for the first time in winter, my hands hurt from the cold. I thought of you at the border. Was it colder and hungrier? I just washed clothes, but you braved the snow and carried your life on your shoulders to fight in the war. This trace of pity revealed a hint of sadness in her words. How can a person like you not be worshipped after death? There are more than 10 million people like me who love you. She revealed a smile. You are worthy of others, but they are not worthy of you. Lu Xinglan didn't move, his eyes focused on her. He was extremely obedient and was gently stroked like this. He had never understood the tenderness of a girl. He had never experienced gentle treatment. He thought that he was used to rolling in the cold snow and wind without anyone to comfort him. He didn't feel that it was hard. But it turned out that it wasn't hard. It was just that he didn't care. He remembered something. An old soldier was sitting next to him. He was drinking and reading the new letter his wife had written for him to the illiterate veteran. The last paragraph. He didn't know how he remembered. When you're outside, pay more attention to your food. The night at the border is cold, and I'm looking at the moon. When I sat by the window and mended your clothes, I looked at the moon and thought that you were also looking at it, and my heart was comforted. He didn't quite understand when the old soldier heard this sentence. Why are you crying like an old dog? It turned out that it felt so good to have someone thinking about you. She was so good that when he looked at her, tears welled up in his eyes. Every word was filled with tenderness. Compared to Ling Shue's knife, it was sharper, but it made people gladly hold her hand. He wanted her to take pity on him, but her words pierced right through his heart. Wei Wei Bai suddenly retracted her hand and turned her face away to wipe her eyes. How am I being sentimental? I just feel that a hero like young master shouldn't be so dejected. You're a great general. Suddenly, she stopped talking. The man gently pressed his face against her thigh. The frosty white couldn't compare to the fragile whiteness on the man's delicate side face. His eyes were half closed and his hands were wrapped around her waist like a child seeking solace. The girl was silent for a long time. Then she gently reached out and touched his hair. Her fingertips stroked his messy hair and smoothed it out one by one. No one spoke. This rare silence was like a wounded lone wolf that found a safe place and finally dared to put down its vigilant eyes and slowly rest. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 55. T. Chapter 2803. Mother Lu was under house arrest and the courtyard was sealed. The people from the royal family seemed to be on guard. They didn't send offerings over. Lu Xinglan didn't react when he heard the news. It was as if the two sides had stopped fighting and quieted down. As for Mother Lu, it was said that the maid who served her was beaten and scolded by her. Lu Xinglan only raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "Since she doesn't like to be served, let her do it herself." Mother Lu had too many problems. Her selfishness was in her bones. Lu Xinglan hated her. But she was his biological mother, so he couldn't kill her. But he didn't have so much patience in other places. Lu Xinglan finished practicing his bow and looked at all the arrows that hit the bullseye with a calm expression. He was dressed in white, his sleeves were narrow and neat, and a corner of his robe was tied at his waist. He looked extraordinarily handsome and elegant. He threw the bow and arrows to Axian Wu. Beside him, a pair of soft hands held a cup of tea and placed it in front of him. Lu Xinglan took it. He looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai wearing a green dress, standing slim like a lotus leaf in summer. Her hair was also tied into two cute buns, with pink ribbons and small pearls hanging from them, like pink flower buds on a lotus leaf. When she saw him looking over, she gently touched her cherry-like red lips with a handkerchief and said with a smile, "Young master, drink some tea. Don't be too tired." Lu Xinglan looked at her charming and enchanting eyes, full of pure charm, and smiled. He suddenly felt that the sun was a little hot. He quickly picked up the tea and took a sip. He didn't know what the tea tasted like. But it was definitely delicious. After drinking the tea, Lu Xinglan went to take a bath. When he came back, he saw that Wei Wei Bai was already sitting in the room. She was sitting by the window, and the window was propped up, revealing the white light. The girl had her head lowered and was carefully grinding the petals. When she saw him, she immediately smiled. "I had nothing to do, so I made some rouge." After all, there weren't many rouges in this era that were easy to use. There were even heavy metals that exceeded the standard. Wei Wei Bai, who was afraid that her face would rot, used a terrifying amount of perseverance to become an expert in natural plant skincare products in a short period of time. There was nothing that could stop her from running wildly on the path of pursuing beauty. Lu Xinglan saw that her soft and tender fingertips were stained with the juice of flower petals. The bright colors were exceptionally beautiful. Lu Xinglan watched in silence for a while before she struggled to shift her gaze elsewhere. Then he said, "You make everything look good." Wei Wei Bai smiled even more brightly. "I'm glad you like it." Lu Xinglan was puzzled for a moment. She applied it herself. What did it have to do with whether he liked her or not? He suddenly realized what she meant. Lu Xinglan pursed her lips and walked to the table as if nothing had happened. Then, she picked up a pen and began to draw a map. One stroke at a time. But the painting was completely out of shape. If they were to use this map to attack the enemy, they would probably fall into the enemy's trap. Lu Xinglan lowered her eyes. Her expression was obscure and dark. He pulled out another piece of white paper, but just as he was about to write, he suddenly paused. The girl by the window didn't seem to notice his peeking gaze. She leaned against the chair. Her wide green sleeves revealed her beautiful white lotus-like wrist. On her wrist was a jade bracelet. The emerald green jade bracelet made her fair skin look even whiter and more delicious. When Lu Xinglan came back to his senses, the tip of his pen had already outlined the girl's beautiful figure. Chapter 2804. With just a few strokes, the image of her leaning against the window was deeply engraved. Lu Xinglan stopped writing and his face suddenly turned red. He quickly tried to take the paper away. However, he heard the girl's sweet voice. "Young master, it's done. Do you think the color looks good?" Lu Xinglan's fingers stopped and he looked up. He saw the girl stretch out her fair fingers. Her fingertips were covered with delicate pollen. The red color had a glossy halo. Due to the lack of qi and blood, the color on her lips had thinned quite a bit. She smeared the lipstick on her lips. That bright red color was so beautiful that it dazzled the eyes of others. Wei Bai's fingers hung down casually. The red color fell between her nails. It was like a flower bloomed on her fingertips. However, the most beautiful flower was the one on her lips. "Does it look good?" She seemed to see his daze and couldn't help but laugh softly. She innocently reached out to cover her seductive red lips. Lu Xinglan's face was a little red. He seemed a little embarrassed. He lowered his eyes and didn't look at her. He seemed to see that she was teasing him. Wei Bai seemed to find it funny too. He had never seen a woman wearing rouge, so he didn't hold back. So she corrected her attitude and lowered her head seriously to continue making the rouge. Lu Xinglan looked at the drawing on the paper. His dark eyes had a trace of embarrassment and panic. 4 girls. Although he appeared calm, he felt that he was facing a huge problem. Her every move. He didn't know how to deal with it. Even when he woke up in the middle of the night and stared at her sleeping face, that burning surge made him feel extremely uncomfortable. But he didn't dare to touch her. The more he had feelings for her, the more he was afraid of hurting her. Lu Xinglan wouldn't be at a loss like he was facing Wei Bai even if he was facing a powerful enemy. Outside the window, Xian Wu shouted, "It's time for dinner." Wei Bai was already hungry. She immediately jumped up from the chair. "Have you eaten?" "Young master, I'll help Xian Wu serve the dishes." With that, she happily ran past him. 2 pink ribbons gracefully swept past his arms. The touch of brushing clothes, almost no. However, it made Lu Xinglan stiffen. After she ran out, silence returned to the room. Lu Xinglan stood there for a while, then began to pack up the paper as if nothing had happened. Just as she was about to put the painting back into the box, she heard a voice coming from behind her. Suddenly, his eyes fell on the lipstick scattered around the window and on the small table. He was silent for a while. Then, he took out a clean brush and dipped it in some red. Then, he placed it on the painting. The girl's originally colorless lips had a trace of bright red staining them. It was tempting and delicious. It was like the beauty of a cherry. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. Lu Xinglan lowered his eyes in a daze. Then, he heard the sound of cheerful footsteps coming from outside. Only then did he immediately put down his brush and put away the painting. Then, he spread out a new piece of paper and scribbled on it. It looked like a map, but it was actually a bunch of nonsense scribbles. Wei Bai and Xian Wu set the table. "Time to eat," the girl called out in a sweet voice. Lu Xinglan lowered his head, his back facing them. He calmly said, "After I finish these few strokes and finish this map, I'll eat." He said it as if he had really drawn a map. After eating, Wei Bai sat under the light and did needlework. Her needlework was abnormally rough. A pair of mandarin ducks were embroidered with the temperament of 2 dumb ducks. Lu Xinglan was still indifferently commenting on it. "It looks pretty good. //." Chapter 2805. When she said she wanted to make a sachet for him, he immediately saw anything she embroidered. In his eyes, everything was perfect. Xanwu poked his head in to take a look, then curled his lips. It's so ugly. It's worse than old Yin-yang who sold pancakes at the border. Wei Bai said, Old Yin-yang. Xanwu said, her fingers are disabled, so she embroidered it with her toes. Wei Bai was speechless. Lu Xinglan slowly pulled out his sword, then walked out and said to Xanwu, my hands are itching, there must be mosquitoes. Come and kill them with me. After that, the sword light went straight for Xanwu's head. Xanwu was confused, are there mosquitoes on my head? Then he realized that Lu Xinglan was angry again. He said his woman was beautiful. He was angry. He deliberately insulted his woman, and he was angry again. And the embroidery was really ugly. That was the truth. It was not only women who were pretentious, but also men. She was so pretentious and unreasonable. After killing the mosquitoes, Lu Xinglan came back slowly. He saw that Wei Bai was seriously embroidering the sachet, and he was relieved. It was good that she did not think that her embroidery was ugly. Wei Bai asked the system, is my embroidery nice? The system said, you want to hear the truth or the lie? Wei Bai said, only children make choices, I choose to listen. The system said, the lie is ugly. Wei Bai was calm and proud, my embroidery skills can only be understood by the immortals. The system said, the truth is too ugly, what kind of motherfucking thing are you embroidering? Wei Bai was silent for a while, then said, no wonder, you're just an ordinary system. After hurting each other, Su Tong felt refreshed and continued with her ordinary life. Lu Xinglan was sitting beside her, holding a book, pretending to read. He was actually looking at her. Such a warm and quiet life. It was something Lu Xinglan had never experienced before, but after experiencing it, he felt that it would be great if it could continue like this. He saw the girl's eyelashes fluttering, her beautiful eyes looking around. She stole a glance at him. However, she met his gaze. The two of them were stunned for a moment before they lowered their heads and blushed at the same time. Lu Xinglan's breathing quickened, and her fingers couldn't help but twitch. Then, she gently reached out her hand. At the speed of a snail, he wanted to touch her hairband. It was purely because he thought that her hairband was pretty. He didn't want to touch her on purpose. Lu Xinglan thought expressionlessly, but she didn't wait for her fingers to touch him. Xanwu's voice sounded eerily, young master, you have news to deal with. Lu Xinglan's fingers stiffened, and then she retracted them as if nothing had happened. She raised her extremely cold eyes and looked at Xanwu outside the door. Xanwu's head was swollen, and his expression was cold and emotionless. He couldn't tell if it was intentional. Lu Xinglan originally wanted to refuse this kind of official business. However, he heard Wei Bai say gently, young master, you have matters to attend to. Go ahead. Lu Xinglan couldn't bring herself to reject him. He was a hero in her eyes. Heroes can't treat their work as nothing, right? So Lu Xinglan smiled and said, okay, I'll be right back. Then she got up and walked out. Her face was as dark as charcoal. Xanwu whispered the news. Lu Xinglan was indifferent. It was a spy hidden by the imperial family who needed to pass on the palace's news at Lotus Lake. Lu Xinglan had to go there himself. This kind of message passing was dangerous, but it wasn't. Because the location of the message was always different. Generally speaking, the person who passed on the message was very professional. If there wasn't someone more professional tailing them, there wouldn't be a big problem. Lu Xinglan pondered for a moment, then suddenly turned and walked into the house. It was still early. The scenery at Lotus Lake was beautiful. She must be bored in the residence. Lu Xinglan thought of many reasons to take her out to play. However, when his calm eyes met the girl's puzzled eyes, all his words were stuck. The two of them looked at each other for a while. Lu Xinglan suddenly turned and walked out. Just as she was about to leave, he suddenly stopped at the door with his hands behind his back. The man's tone was calm. He stepped on the moonlight and said, "Although the night scenery at Lotus Lake is ordinary, it's fun to play and pick lotus seeds occasionally. I'm going to admire the lotuses tonight. You can wait by my side." Wei Wei Bai's reaction was a little slow. She was stunned for a moment before she put down the needle. "Yes, young master." Lu Xinglan nodded with his back to her. Then, when he stepped over the threshold, he almost tripped. His steps were nimble. He was about to fall, but he immediately steadied himself. Then, Lu Xinglan's eyes were cold and calm. "The moon is too dark. I can't see clearly." Wei Wei Bai and Xian Wu looked at him, speechless. There was no need to explain. It was even more awkward after the explanation. The S/the full articles the downloads the S. Chapter 2806. There was a lotus field in the depths of Lotus Lake. Boats came and went. Lu Xinglan sat at the side of the boat, wearing a bamboo hat. He held a fishing hook in his hand and was fishing at night. Xian Wu had a mustache. His face was painted black and wrinkled. He looked like an old man in charge of rowing the boat. The lotus field in Lotus Lake was too dense. As the boat moved forward, the lotus leaves that were too tall opened up on both sides of the boat. Wei Wei Bai didn't dress up. She and Lu Xinglan sat at the stern of the boat, humming as they picked a bunch of lotus leaves and lotus flowers. Lotus leaves could cook underwater fire. Lotus flowers could be made into lotus cakes. She wanted to see if she could use flowers to make some skincare products. Recently, she had the urge to make skincare products for any flower that wasn't poisonous. Lu Xinglan's eyes were calm, as if he was staring at the fish hook. In fact, he couldn't catch a single fish. If his heart wasn't calm, the fish wouldn't come. He listened to the sweet song in his ears. It came from the girl's throat, from the tip of her tongue, and from her lips that were painted with flower rouge. Half of Lu Xinglan's face, which was hidden under the bamboo hat, seemed to be facing the fish. In fact, he had been looking at his side from the corner of his eye. The girl was happy and content. She calmly arranged the large number of lotus leaves and lotus flowers. The lake was very lively. The light of lanterns was everywhere. The shore of Lotus Lake was full of people who came to avoid the summer heat. There were hawkers everywhere. There were also boats on the lake to buy fresh water chestnuts. Wei Wei Bai reached out and casually touched the apricot hairpin in her hair bun. She was at the tender age of a young girl. She was budding. She was gorgeous yet pure. It was the most attractive age. A boat was approaching from the edge of their lotus field. It was much bigger and more gorgeous than their boat. Lu Xinglan looked up indifferently. She knew what kind of boat it was with a glance. It was a boat for high-ranking officials and nobles to have fun. They were afraid of being caught by their parents on the shore, so they directly brought it into the lake. There were brothels on the boat. It was all about eating, drinking, and playing. Those vermin who indulged in a life of luxury. Of course, Lu Xinglan was too lazy to care about these things. However, when the ship passed by them, a few lotus flowers fell into the lake. It was right beside them. There were some ripples in the lake, and the lotus flowers were about to float away. Lu Xinglan calmly used her fishing rod and caught the lotus in her mouth. He dragged the lotus over. Wei Wei Bai looked at her curiously. Small pearls dangled from her beautiful hair band. They fell on her neck, accentuating the fair skin of her slender neck. It was even prettier than the luster of the pearls. She asked softly, "Young master, what is this?" Lu Xinglan didn't try to hide anything. After fishing up the flowers, she placed them in her hands. "There's a small wooden tube inside, you can pick it up." Wei Wei Bai reached out with her fingertips and clasped the inside of the petals. Sure enough, he found the wooden pipe inside. Then, Wei Wei Bai passed the wooden tube to Lu Xinglan. All this was hidden in the gloomy lotus field. Only the big ship was brightly lit, illuminating one side of their ship's bow. The playboys on the ship were unrestrained. One of them was a young man with his clothes open, drinking wine wildly. He was malicious and pale. The people around him were exceptionally careful with him. The singers and dancers came over to serve him enthusiastically. When they chartered the ship, these officials and nobles who were usually abnormally powerful gave orders. They had to serve this young man who was the last to board the ship. But no one had seen him before. However, when they saw those officials' sons who were usually extremely arrogant, at this moment they were serving the young man like little quails. Everyone knew to be careful. Full text // Download. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the comma. Chapter 2807. The young man drank wine with a sinister expression. When he saw a woman come over to touch him, he didn't refuse. A songstress was bold. Her slender fingers reached into his open clothes, intending to give him an incomparably ecstatic night. The young man's eyes were lazy, but the emotions in his eyes were cold. The lights of the big boat swayed. He casually looked at the lotus field. He saw a simple yellow paper lantern at the bow of the boat. Under the lantern, the lotus flowers bloomed. A young girl standing at the bow of the boat reached out to adjust the position of the lantern. Her beautiful wrist and delicate fingers touched the lantern. The lotus flowers picked from the bow of the boat were placed at her feet. Her beautiful skirt was next to the petals. Her figure was petite, but she was unusually well-proportioned and beautiful. As if she didn't care, she looked up at the big boat indifferently. Her eyes were charming, and the corners of her eyes were slightly red. She was even more beautiful than the flowers. The young man was stunned for a moment. However, he saw the girl adjust the position of the lantern and sit back down. The boat was small, and the lotus leaves were too high. They covered her face, but it gave her more of a sense of mystery. Seeing that the big boat was about to pass, the young man suddenly pushed the woman away. Then, he stood up and looked outside the boat. He finally saw clearly that a man was fishing on the boat. The girl was squatting down, holding a flower and saying something to the man beside her with a smile. The young man was just taking a look on a whim. He happened to see the man raise his head and reach out to straighten the girl's hair bun. That man only revealed his chin. The young man's eyes were extremely ruthless. Lu Xinglan. Why was he here? Could it be that someone leaked the news that he came to the flower boat tonight? So he was here to assassinate him or follow him. Mother Lu was under house arrest. More than half of Lu Xinglan's power had spread to the capital. Many ministers kept talking about how good Lu Xinglan was. The young man was ruthless when he thought about it. This country was his. Not Lu Xinglan's. Weren't Lu Xinglan and the Lu family their watchdogs? What watchdog overshadowed its master's limelight? He said sternly, "Stop the boat and call the guards." The people on the boat were shocked. Those nobles knew how powerful this young man was. She immediately pushed away all the female singers and kicked the pimp. Stop the ship. Go quickly. On Lu Xinglan's side, his fingers caressed the girl's silky hair. He also straightened the hairpin. Her bun was too loose. Therefore, hairpin could not stay still. Lu Xinglan carelessly put down her hand and said indifferently, "All right, be careful. The hairpin won't fall." Wei Wei Bai cupped her face and revealed a cute smile. She sat and said, "Thank you, young master." Lu Xinglan turned around with a serious expression and hummed in acknowledgement. No one saw that most of the ears under his bamboo hat were red. The fishing rod still couldn't catch a single fish. This was the worst fishing record he had ever had. Lu Xinglan was just about to put away her fishing rod. He saw a familiar figure standing at the bow of the ship. The young man was dressed in casual clothes and his hair was casually draped over his shoulders. He gave off a lustful feeling. With one look, it was obvious that they were having fun in the boat. Lu Xinglan faintly raised her eyebrows. No wonder the person who sent the message said that they were coming here. It turned out that Yuan Xian was here to have some fun. He followed Yuan Xian out of the palace and brought the news along. Lu Xinglan saw it and couldn't pretend that he didn't see it. He threw away the fishing rod in his hand and then stood up unhurriedly. After blocking the girl, he bowed politely. Slash. Chapter 2808. But he didn't call him His Majesty. Yuan Xian appeared in the wrong place. He was wearing private clothes, so he didn't want anyone to know his identity. Lu Xinglan lowered his eyes, hiding the cold mockery in his eyes. He really had nothing better to do. He was having fun among the people. Yuan Xian stood at the bow of the boat, standing high. When he looked down at Lu Xinglan coldly, his arrogance was obvious. He smiled coldly, but thought of something. He suppressed his resentment and showed a friendly smile. Xinglan, you're also visiting the lotus field at night. It's not that I didn't know that you, who are always busy with work and never go out to play, have the mood to do this. What a coincidence. When the young man said this, the suspicion and malice in his eyes were obvious. Lu Xinglan's face was calm, his thin lips slightly curved. I'm really used to being alone at the border. I'm not used to the atmosphere here in the capital, so the people beside me can't stand it, so they dragged me to visit the lake, right? The people beside him. The young man's malevolent gaze fell behind him. But Lu Xinglan had covered her up so well. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "Cannon fodder." The system said, "The emperor of the southern kingdom in this plain is called Yuan Xian. He's ambitious and works against the male lead, so he's a cannon fodder with a strong sense of presence." Wei Wei Bai understood. Isn't this more unlucky than cannon fodder? After comprehending so many planes, Bai Wei Wei was also clear. The people she conquered were all favored by the heavens. Whoever killed them would die. Look, she just didn't have many planes to live in, right? She must have died early because she tried to conquer her targets every day. So those who went against her targets either died early or were on their way to early death. Lu Xinglan saw Yuan Xian's venomous gaze fall behind him. His deep eyes darkened a little. Then he saluted and said to Yuan Xian, "Then I won't disturb you. It's late at night and there are women behind me, so I need to return early." Yuan Xian smiled brightly. "Why did you bring your womenfolk here to play? If you don't play, what are you doing here?" He was still suspicious. This young emperor was naturally suspicious and cruel. He would rather kill a group of people by mistake than let go of one. Sometimes, he would even kill people casually for something that didn't exist. Therefore, Lu Xinglan knew very well that no matter how good his reasons were, she would not be able to change her mind. Yuan Xian would still doubt his motives. He even doubted it. Was he following him? And these suspicions were enough for him to kill everyone around him. That was the only way to ensure that all the spies around him would die. As for whether or not there were innocent people, this cruel tyrant didn't care. Lu Xinglan pursed her lips tightly as a trace of murderous intent flashed through her dark eyes. Unfortunately, the person who had been hiding beside Yuan Xian had sent him a message. If Yuan Xian returned to the palace with suspicion in his heart, he reckoned that by tomorrow morning, he would be able to receive news of the death of the person he had hidden beside Yuan Xian. Lu Xinglan didn't show any emotion on her face, but she couldn't help but clench her fists. He was going to comfort Yuan Xian. Or just leave. Or a reason that he could believe. Lu Xinglan pondered for a while and was about to take a step forward. His hand was gently held by the person behind him. Young master. Wei Wei Bai poked her head out from behind him. The beautiful girl was smiling, and her eyes were charming but not seductive. Is she your friend? She asked with a smile, like an innocent girl who didn't know anything about the world. Chapter 2809. But she has a lively appearance that young girls don't have, and that pair of beautiful eyes are full of clear curiosity. Yuan Xian was originally coldly observing Lu Xinglan. He began to suspect that the people around him were tipping him off. But for a moment, he was dazzled by the smile of the girl beside Lu Xinglan. Lu Xinglan frowned, wanting her to stand behind him. But Wei Wei Bai had already walked out from behind him, holding his finger and looking at the people on the boat with him. Wei Wei Bai looked up, as if she didn't know the turbulent waves between the two of them. Her voice was clear. May I ask where the young master on the boat is from? Are you my husband's good friend? There's wine on the boat, why don't you come down for a get-together? She was neither servile nor overbearing, and didn't think that he was a big shot, so her tone was very natural. Like a little sister next door, looking at him with a gentle smile. Yuan Xian was stunned, and then he stuttered, your husband? Hearing his question, Wei Wei Bai looked at the man beside her shyly. Her cheeks were stained with pink, like a pinched apricot flower. Then she said in a low voice, I'm the one who makes him come out to play. After all, how can he stay at home every day and not do anything? Also, it's so lively outside, and the summer nights are stuffy and hot. Why don't we come out to the lake to cool off? Although her voice was low, it was clear. So Yuan Xian heard it clearly. Lu Xinglan held her fingers and exerted a little force. He didn't seem to approve of her coming out. But Wei Wei Bai took a step forward and came to the side of the boat, standing among the lotus flowers. It's late at night, and the heat has dissipated. The lake is moist and cold, so it's better for the young master to wear more clothes. My husband and I will leave first. After all, he's not in good health and is used to sleeping early. Yuan Xian looked at Lu Xinglan strangely. Not in good health. Lu Xinglan's martial arts were the best in the world. How could he not be in good health? Could it be that he had some hidden injury, but he didn't show it? The suspicious young king started to be suspicious because of the girl's words. Wei Wei Bai said to the boatman, Uncle, do you still have wine? Give me a bottle. The old man who was rowing the boat was silent for a while before he threw her a small bottle of wine. Wei Wei Bai let go of Lu Xinglan's hand and held the small wine bottle with both hands. It was a small jar with a seal. It was not heavy, but very delicate. Wei Wei Bai looked up at Yuan Xian and said, Since you're my husband's friend, it's fate that we met when we went out. This is the wine I made, I hope you don't mind. After saying that, she threw the bottle with all her might. The wide sleeves slid down to her elbows. Her arm, as white as jade, was exposed. Lu Xinglan's expression changed, and she immediately pulled on her sleeve. It's cold, you're not allowed to show your hand. Yuan Xian had already grabbed the wine bottle with one hand. The small bottle could only fill about 10 glasses. He stared blankly at the ground. However, when he saw Lu Xinglan's worried expression, he smiled coldly. Lu Xinglan could touch women now. He thought that Lu Xinglan was lying to him. After all, everyone knew how much he hated women. How could he come out to the lake with a woman? However, when he reached out to stroke her slightly messy hair, held her hand, and whispered something worriedly, Yuan Xian's heart surged with anger for some unknown reason. He blamed it on the damned secret medicine that had lost its effect. How did he make Lu Xinglan like women? If the Lu family continued to exist, wouldn't he have to bear more pressure? The military power would be controlled by the Lu family for generations. /save button. Chapter 28:10. Of course, this thought only briefly flashed through his mind. More importantly, he saw the girl tilt her head and smile. All right, it's tiring to come out and play. Go back and rest after saying goodbye to your friend. Lu Xinglan seemed to be stunned, but used his finger to caress her cheek. This look. He really liked the way women looked. It couldn't be an act. Yuan Xian held the bottle and watched Lu Xinglan turn around to bid farewell. Then the boat slowly sailed into the lotus. The girl seemed to turn around, her clear eyes filled with gentleness. She smiled and casually turned around again. Yuan Xian couldn't recall his thoughts at that moment. He didn't even suspect Lu Xinglan's purpose. After all, if Lu Xinglan could really touch women and like women, then it was natural to bring a woman to the lake. This Lotus Lake was the biggest and best place to play in the capital. At night, people with a little extra money would flock here. It wasn't surprising to meet them. Yuan Xian convinced himself. He didn't even realize that with his suspicious personality, he was so easily convinced. He stood at the bow of the boat for a long time, holding the bottle and frowning. As the cold wind blew, he thought of the girl's words. It was cold at night, so he had to wear more clothes. He was a martial artist, how could he be afraid of this little bit of cold? The songstress rushed over excitedly. Hey, little brother, why are you here for the wind? Let's go in and do something fun. Yuan Xian's absent-minded expression changed, and he glared at her with his malicious eyes. He pushed her away and said in disgust, Someone, throw this woman into the lake. After that, he slowly walked into the cabin, holding the bottle tightly in his hand. When he walked into the boat, he suddenly said to the little eunuch beside him, who had also changed into civilian clothes, Bring me a robe. As he said that, Yuan Xian pulled his unbuttoned robe with one hand. On the other side of the boat, the system said faintly, Why are you hooking up with cannon fodder? Wei Wei Bai said, I'm not hooking up, I'm hooking up just because I smile. I smile at you every day, why don't you love you? Don't I love you enough? Wei Wei Bai said perfunctorily, If you say so, then so be it. I'm just helping Lu Xinglan out of trouble. That little brat doesn't look like a good person. His eyes are about to roll to the sky. I just smiled and let him know that Lu Xinglan definitely likes me. After saying this, she helplessly said, If he falls in love with me like this, then I'm really harming him. Who told me to be born beautiful and hard to give up? Loving me is also his fate. Ugh, I don't love you, goodbye. Wei Wei Bai giggled. I won't see you off. Come on, it's another beautiful day of hurting each other. With that said, the boat docked. Lu Xinglan went ashore first and reached out to take her hand off the boat. Wei Wei Bai placed her fingers in his palm. After getting off the boat, she gently smiled and said, Thank you, my husband. Lu Xinglan held her hand tightly and didn't respond. She just turned around and led her away. Along the way, there were bustling lights and people brushing shoulders. He had forgotten to get on the carriage. Wei Bai didn't remind him either. After walking for an unknown amount of time, the man with a calm face said, "Call me again." Wei Bai was stunned for a moment before she reacted. She softly smiled and said, "Husband." Lu Xinglan stiffened for a while, then continued to walk forward stiffly. After walking for a while, on the brightly lit street, the man suddenly said, "Yes." She called him husband. He responded. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 70. Download the at https://m Sashu. Calm. Chapter 28:11. Wei Bai felt that this world was going very smoothly. For a man like Lu Xinglan, as long as he didn't do anything big like killing his father. Time was long. As time went by, the favorability would be full. This was a strategy model for a long time. Wei Bai embroidered a mandarin duck sachet, and smiled. It was a beautiful world. Most importantly, the flower skincare products were very effective. Her skin was very good now. If she could get a medal of the most beautiful woman in the universe, it would be perfect. The system saw the host's silly look and calmly ate the Emperor Deluxe brand chocolate. He sighed. He was a little poor and couldn't eat the Cosmic Star chocolate, so he could only nibble on the damn Emperor Trump on his cheeks. The side quest sighed. "Is it good?" The system said, "It's so-so. I'm sick of it. Next time I'll change it." The side quest said, "Is that so? I recently bought some super awesome food brands. Then I saw that the fridge was too small, so I changed it to a bigger one. It can only adjust the temperature and a series of functions." The system reacted and then showed a warm and awkward smile. "Oh, long time no see. Isn't this a side quest treasure? Do you want to go on a blind date? I've been short of an ATM recently, not a bosom friend." The side quest looked at him coldly. The system laughed. The side quest looked at him with a death stare. The system picked up the shield to block the death stare and continued to laugh. In life, people relied on their cute smiles to survive in the world. The more he smiled, the more people would like him. Then, he would give him more delicious food. The side quest finally said, "I changed a new fridge, it's locked." The system's smile froze. The side quest said, "You ate my food that can be exchanged for 300,000 life points. I have frozen your account, all your life points will be used to pay for my loss." It was calm and professional. It didn't laugh with the system. The system's face was stiff at first, but when it heard that its account was frozen, it immediately said generously, "It's my fault. I'll give you all the life points in my account." This attitude made the side quest's face soften a little. "Since you've admitted your mistake, I'm not that heartless. I'll lower the difficulty of the side quest for you." The system immediately patted its chest and promised, "My account has a lot of life points. It's all because I scrimp and save. Look at me, I'm so poor that I can only eat your food. You know how thrifty I am." When the branch director heard this, his expression softened. Indeed, for someone to bring their host to so many planes, they must have received a lot of life points and credit points. Even the side rewards were given to the system in proportion. Furthermore, it had heard of the legend of System 004 before. Although he was not approachable, Ping Yi was approachable. The octopus star, pentagram star, and the like that were brought along were all eventually built up to become kings through huge amounts of wealth. 004 was a super rich man. When he thought of the side quest, he realized that he had actually obtained account number 004. It felt a little unreal. It was going to be rich. He was extremely rich. Thinking about this, he suddenly felt that this repulsive 004 was simply a great philanthropist. He was very handsome too. The system chimed in, "You've taken advantage of me. Just wait till you're rich." Sigh, the wealth that I scrimped and saved was taken away by you. I might have to eat expired food soon. The branch director immediately shared the password to his refrigerator. For you to eat. The system's face was gloomy. If you eat this once, you won't be able to eat in the future. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 28:12. The system immediately said, "I'm rich, I promise you'll be able to eat your fill for the next few years." The system immediately laughed, "Let's sign the contract, after all, it involves such a large amount of wealth." When he heard the side quest, he was impressed. It immediately took out the contract, and the system signed it. No one can go back on their word. The system steeled its heart and wrote on it, 3 years of luxury food set for the system. The system also signed it immediately, and all its health points were transferred to the system. After the two of them signed, they both laughed. The system said, "Good brother." "What an idiot." The system said, "Good friend." "What a long-term idiot luxury meal ticket." Wei Wei Bai heard a ding. She was embroidering a sachet, and felt her eyelids fight, so she closed her eyes. Hearing the familiar ding, she lazily supported her chin with her hand. The system's giggling voice sounded, "My dear, I love you." Wei Wei Bai, what kind of terrifying mission was he going to give her? Did it want her to kill Lu Xinglan's entire family? No, Lu Xinglan's entire family was dead except for Mother Lu. With Mother Lu's behavior, killing her would probably only reduce Lu Xinglan's favorability by 5 points. Or was it going to destroy the world? Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up, and she was very alert. "Yes, I miss you too. Miss you to die, miss you to die, miss you to die, miss you to die." Important things need to be said 3 times to show sincerity. The system said eagerly, "The difficulty can only be lowered by 1 level, this can't be helped, the authority is limited. Your previous difficulty was raised too high, so even if it was lowered by 1 level, it would still be more difficult to complete." Wei Wei Bai. Oh. Was it short-circuited by lightning? Power, state, throne. Wei Wei Bai's eyebrows twitched. Please help the male lead to the change of dynasty and ascend to the throne in 2 months. 2 months. Ascend to the throne. This was the lowered difficulty of the mission. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but ask humbly, "If it's not lowered by 1 level, then what is my mission?" Ding, the mission is for the host to ascend to the throne within half a month and become a strong woman like Wu De. The side quest was also a pity. Although it's a bit difficult to complete, I did choose it on purpose. Do you feel like the main female lead? Wei Wei Bai, big, very big, big your head. With this comparison, he suddenly felt that letting Lu Xinglan ascend the throne wasn't something unacceptable. And why was the side quest's attitude so gentle? It was too magical. Could it be that it had also fallen in love with her beautiful face and pure soul? Wei Wei Bai sighed. Her beauty was really a sin. It was not impossible for Lu Xinglan to become the emperor. Right now, the power of the entire southern nation was in his hands. After so many generations of the Lu family sacrificed themselves in battle, Lu Xinglan's reputation had grown tremendously. Anyone who talked about Lu Xinglan would have to talk about the Lu family's martyrs. He had a huge natural advantage, which was the support of the people. Not to mention, Lu Xinglan was the god of war of the entire Southern Empire. He was also the stabilizing force of the Southern Empire. As long as Lu Xinglan was willing, she would wear the imperial robes tomorrow and kick that little brat off the throne. There would definitely be no problem for him to sit on it. Wei Weibai supported her face with her hands and pouted. So this side quest was not a death quest. She suddenly reacted. What's the punishment for failure? Side quest, oh, disfigurement, soul disfigurement. Wei Weibai. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, save button at the bottom to record your reading record. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.